In August of 2006, I was living in a big apartment building on the north end of Pittsburgh. It was one of those places tucked up in the hills where the roads curved and twisted like old veins through the neighborhood. My building sat right at a weird intersection, kind of like a Y, where a main road ran along the front and another road split off right from the middle of the building, climbing up a steep hill lined with more apartments and duplexes. You'd have to walk around the side to get to the front if you came out the back, which is what I usually did. At the time, I was going to school at the Culinary Institute. It was a weird phase in life, I guess. I wasn't doing anything special beyond try to pass classes, stay fed, and see where things went. Most of the people in the neighborhood were either students like me, families living paycheck to paycheck, or immigrants, mostly Eastern European, African, and a few Mexican families who kept to themselves. It wasn't dangerous, not really, but it always felt like anything could happen without warning. There was a tension in the air some nights, especially in late summer, when the heat didn't break and temps were short. That day had been pretty normal. It was hot enough that the pavement felt like it radiated heat through your shoes. I'd been in school all day, wearing that heavy chef's uniform that made you sweat no matter what the temperature was. I remember being tired. That dragging kind of tired where you feel it in your back and your jaw. When I got back to my apartment around 5:30 p.m., I barely even set my bag down before I was already getting ready to head out again. A few friends lived just up the road from me, maybe 5 minutes if you cut across the front lot and took the side street. We had plans to hang out. Nothing major, just the usual drinks, video games, maybe some leftover pizza if someone had extra. I left through the back door of my building like I always did. Walked around the eastern side of the building, which meant passing by the middle section where that Y intersection formed. That section was always a little strange. It was wide open, like a small plaza with cracked sidewalks and patchy grass. Some of the kids in the neighborhood would run through there, yelling and chasing each other. In the evenings, you'd see people walking back from the bus stop with grocery bags or pushing strollers. But right then, it was quiet. I don't remember hearing anything except my own footsteps and the buzz of insects in the trees. As I got close to the edge of the road, I spotted a woman maybe 20 feet ahead of me. She was walking in the same direction I was heading, just a bit further up. I didn't know her name, never talked to her, but I recognized her immediately. She rode the same bus I did, the one we caught near the university. She looked tired that day, like a lot of people around there always did. That kind of worn-out look that comes from having too many things to worry about and not enough hours in the day. I barely looked before stepping into the street. I don't know why. Maybe because I crossed there 100 times before. Maybe because I was distracted. I glanced across, didn't see anything, and moved forward like I always did. Then everything changed in 1 second. I heard tires screech. Not just the quick chirp of someone braking hard, but that long, ripping sound of rubber being dragged across pavement, full speed. It was sharp and violent and raw. My head snapped to the left, toward the road that split from the middle of the building, the one that climbed uphill. There was a car barreling straight down it, fast, too fast. A dark-colored sedan, maybe black or blue, I couldn't tell. The sun had already started lowering behind the hill, so there were long shadows stretching across the pavement. The car came out of nowhere, aimed right at me. I didn't think. I just jumped backward. My foot slipped off the edge of the curb, and I went down hard, landing on my back, hands scraping across the gravel. The car shot past me, and in the same motion spun into a sudden, brutal turn. The tires shrieked again as it did a wide, sweeping 180-degree spin. It smashed into the wall of the building across the intersection, slamming the front end into the bricks with a loud, cracking explosion. Dust, glass, and chunks of concrete flew into the air like shrapnel. I laid there for a second, breathing hard, heart pounding so loud it was like someone beating a drum inside my ears. My palm stung. I had no idea what just happened. Then I stood up and saw the blood. It was everywhere. At first I thought the driver was hurt. I started walking toward the car, still kind of in a daze, try to understand what just happened. My first thought wasn't about the woman. I didn't even see her at first. But then, as I got closer, I saw something that made my stomach twist. The woman, the one I'd seen just moments before, was pinned between the front of the car and the wall of the building. Her body was pressed flat in a way that didn't look human anymore. Her limbs were twisted at angles that bones weren't supposed to bend. There was so much blood pouring down the bricks that it looked like someone had thrown buckets of red paint over the wall. And then I saw something else. Something worse. Bits of brain matter and tissue were caught in the broken plastic of the car's grille. You could see them, wedged between twisted metal and fractured headlights. It didn't look real at first. I just stood there staring, trying to piece it together, try to convince myself that I wasn't looking at what I knew I was. My phone was already in my hand. I don't even remember pulling it out. I was calling 911. My voice was shaking so bad I could barely answer the dispatcher's questions. I remember her asking if the person was still alive. I couldn't respond for a second, just stared at the wreckage and said, "No, she's dead." The police arrived fast. Real fast. Maybe 3 minutes, maybe 5. Everything after that became a blur. Lights flashing. More cops showing up. Yellow tape getting pulled out. I gave my name, my ID, and told them everything I saw, step by step. They brought me over to the side, away from the scene. More people started showing up. Neighbors, mostly. A few students came out of the buildings nearby. Some people gasped. Some turned and walked away. One lady threw up in the bushes across the street. I stood there for a long time, maybe an hour. I didn't want to be there, but I didn't know where else to go. I didn't want to go back to my apartment. I didn't want to go see my friends. I didn't want to move at all. The image of that woman, her crushed body, the blood, the chunks of her brain, was burned into my head like a brand. Eventually, I went back up the street to my friend's place. I didn't talk much, just sat there and tried to pretend like things were normal. Try to drink a beer and act like I wasn't shaking every time someone walked past the window. Later that night, when I tried to go back to my place, I found that the entire block was roped off. The police weren't letting anyone into the 3 buildings closest to the crash, including mine. I didn't argue. I just turned around and walked back to my friends and stayed on the couch. The next morning, a detective called me. He asked if I'd be willing to testify. I said yes without thinking. I was 19 years old, almost done with school, and didn't really understand what I was agreeing to. I figured it would be one day in court, maybe 2. I didn't realize it would drag on for 3 years. Over that time, I flew back to Pittsburgh 5 different times. Every time I got that call, I'd pack a bag, get a cheap flight, and show up in a suit and tie, ready to retell the worst moment of my life. I gave the same story over and over again to lawyers, to judges, to people in suits who barely looked at me while I talked. It was like pulling a scab off again and again. Every time I thought I could forget what happened, I had to live it all over again. Eventually, I learned the truth. The man who drove that car was the woman's ex-husband. They divorced a few months earlier. According to the police, he'd been making threats against her for weeks, telling people he'd kill her, that she didn't deserve the kids, that he'd end her if he couldn't have control. Nobody believed him. Or maybe they did and didn't think he'd follow through. They were refugees from Bosnia, had come to the U.S. for safety, for a better life. They had 2 young kids. I never met them, but I heard that they ended up with a relative, an aunt or maybe a cousin, someone who lived in another part of town. I think about those kids more than I probably should. What they saw, what they heard, what kind of life they have now. The man was found guilty. Vehicular homicide, first-degree murder. He's in prison now, probably for the rest of his life. I didn't go to the final hearing. They offered, but I said no. I didn't want to see him again. I didn't want to stand in the same room as him and know that he'd looked me in the eyes after doing what he did. To this day, I still see it. Every detail. The blood running down the bricks. The sound of the tires. The way her body looked when I got close. I've seen accidents. I've seen people get hurt in kitchens. I've burned myself, sliced myself, worked through blisters and pain. But nothing ever compared to that day. I moved out of Pittsburgh not long after that. Finished school. Got a job. Life moved forward. But sometimes, late at night, I'll close my eyes and still feel the sun on my back, the heat of the pavement, the sudden weight of the world tilting sideways when that car came flying out of nowhere. And I still can't believe I almost stepped into that road. I was one step away from being the one crushed against that wall. It wasn't bravery or instinct that saved me. It was dumb, blind luck. And I've never stopped feeling the weight of that. I don't think I really believed in haunted houses when I was a kid. Not truly. I liked the idea of them, stories of creaking floors, things moving by themselves, cold spots in rooms, but I never thought any of it was real. Not in the way kids talk about monsters under the bed or ghosts hiding in closets. It always felt like pretend, like something you talked about to scare yourself just enough before laughing it off. But the house I grew up in, it was strange. I never knew how strange until recently. I had lived there for most of my childhood, all the way until I left for college. It was a two-story place, kind of old, nothing fancy. Just a regular house on a quiet street. There were houses on either side, a narrow backyard, a front porch with a cracked concrete step, and a mailbox that leaned just slightly no matter how many times we tried to fix it. The siding was this dull beige, and the roof always seemed to need some kind of repair. You could hear squirrels in the attic if you were up late enough. The place had character, the kind of quiet wear and tear that builds up over decades. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can walk through every room in that house. I can feel the carpet on my feet, the way the kitchen tiles were always cold in the morning, even in summer. I remember the creak of the third stair from the bottom, the way the hallway outside the bedrooms always seemed a bit darker than it should have been, even during the day. We never turned that hallway light on unless we had to. It wasn't that we were afraid exactly. It was just a habit, a learned avoidance. Growing up, little things would happen. I'd be in my room and hear a cabinet shut in the kitchen. I'd ask my mom if she was making a snack or getting something out of the pantry, but she'd always shake her head, say she hadn't been downstairs in hours. Sometimes, you'd feel a rush of cold air pass behind you, even with the windows closed and no vents nearby. Once, I was brushing my teeth and I felt like someone was standing behind me. I turned around fast, toothbrush still in my mouth, and the hallway was empty. No one there. I remember staring at the spot behind me in a mirror, trying to convince myself that I hadn't really felt anything. My dad always said it was the age of the house. Old homes creak, settle, move with the wind. Pipes groan, foundations shift, air gets in through cracks you can't see. And for a long time, I believed that. It made sense. And I wasn't the kind of kid who jumped at shadows. I liked logic. I liked knowing things had an explanation. But there was one night I've never been able to explain. It happened when I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, staying at my grandmother's house for Christmas. It was the year we all decided to do the holiday at her place, which we didn't usually do. She lived about an hour away in a single-story house built in the 1950s. It had wood paneling in the living room, a fireplace that never worked quite right, and one of those ticking wall clocks that echoed at night when everything else was quiet. Christmas Eve, I was sleeping in what used to be my uncle's old room. Small space, twin bed, heavy blanket. I had trouble falling asleep, mostly because I was too excited. I was thinking about the gifts under the tree, the way the living room had smelled like cinnamon and pine when we lit the scented candles earlier. I must have drifted off around 10 or 11. Then something woke me up. It started with footsteps. I remember hearing them clearly, slow, and steady, just outside my bedroom door. I thought it might be Santa Claus. I know how that sounds, but I was still young enough to believe. And even if I wasn't sure anymore, there was still a part of me that wanted to believe. So I sat up, my heart racing, and I waited. The footsteps moved into the living room. The floorboards creaked. I thought maybe my parents or my grandma were putting out gifts, maybe having a late night snack. I got out of bed, quietly, and opened the door just a crack. The hallway was empty. I walked slowly, careful not to make noise. I peeked into the room where my parents were sleeping. My dad was snoring, one arm draped over the edge of the bed. My mom was turned away, her back rising and falling with each breath. I walked past the guest bathroom toward my grandma's room. She was asleep too, curled up under a quilt, one hand resting on her chest. So if they were all asleep, who was walking around? I turned back toward the living room. The tree lights had been left on, soft and colorful, blinking in patterns. The room looked peaceful, cozy even. There were no gifts out yet, just the ones that had been there earlier in the evening. I didn't see anyone. Then I heard the footsteps again. They were behind me, in the kitchen. Running now. Quick, almost playful. I ran in that direction, convinced I'd catch someone. Maybe it was my uncle or cousin, though I didn't remember seeing them that night. I got to the kitchen, empty. and the sound came from the hallway again, running quick steps back toward the living room. I turned and ran after them, around the corner, past the couch, back toward the bedrooms. I heard the steps again, this time in the dining room. I cut through the hallway to try and get ahead. I chased them in circles like that for maybe 5 minutes, always just a few steps behind. The sound never stopped, always moving, always leading me around the house. I remember laughing once, just a breath of a laugh, because it felt like a game, like tag. But then I started to get tired. My chest hurt. My legs burned. I stopped in the hallway, my back against the wall, listening. The footsteps were gone. No sound at all. Just the clock ticking from the living room. The refrigerator humming softly in the kitchen. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. I stood there for a long time before going back to bed. I didn't tell anyone about it in the morning. I didn't know what to say. It didn't feel scary at the time. Just strange. It only started to feel scary later when I thought back on it. When I realized I'd been chasing something that couldn't have been there. Everyone else had been asleep. The doors were locked. No one else was in that house. I forgot about it for a long time. Or at least, I didn't think about it much. Life went on. We moved out of my childhood home when I was 16. My parents wanted something newer, smaller. I didn't miss the old house much. It was never a bad place, just odd. Like it had memories of its own, ones we couldn't see. Years passed. I went to college. Got a job, moved into my own apartment. I didn't think about that Christmas Eve again until just a few months ago when I was talking to my grandma. I was visiting her for dinner and we were talking about the old neighborhood. I asked, almost as a joke, if she thought the people who lived in our old house ever experienced anything strange. She gave me this look I didn't understand at first. Then she told me something that made my skin go cold. She said the people they bought the house from had come back years later, knocked on the door, asked if anything weird ever happened there. So they used to hear things, feel cold spots, hear footsteps, just like we did. Apparently, the house had always been that way, and we never knew. It was the first time I ever felt like what I remembered from that Christmas might not have just been my imagination. After that conversation, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The old house, the noises, the way I used to feel like something was watching from the hallway. I started looking through old photos, digging up memories I hadn't touched in years. I tried to remember if anything else had happened. Little things started coming back. Like the time I woke up with the front door wide open even though it had been locked the night before. Or the time we found all the cabinets in the kitchen open one morning. My mom thought it was my brother playing a prank. He swore it wasn't him. We never figured it out. But maybe the scariest part is how normal it all felt back then. When you grow up with something, even if it's strange, you get used to it. You stop questioning it. You accept it as just part of life. That's what scares me now. How much we ignored. I've gone back to that neighborhood once or twice as an adult. Driven past the old house. It looks the same, mostly. Someone fixed the mailbox. Painted the siding a different color. The windows are still the same though. Still the same creaky porch. I've thought about knocking. Asking if they've ever heard footsteps. Ever felt cold in rooms with no draft. But I never do. I don't know if I want to hear the answer. Because if they say yes, then it means it wasn't just us. It means there's something about that house, something built into the walls, something left behind by people we never met. Something I ran after on Christmas Eve, thinking it was Santa Claus. And if they say no, then it means it really was just us. Just me. And I don't know which is worse. A few years ago, my wife started waking up in the middle of the night, screaming. At first, it only happened once or twice a week, and we brushed it off. I'd never seen her like that before. She's usually calm, logical, very grounded in reality. She doesn't believe in ghosts or spirits or anything out of the ordinary. Neither do I, really. I get scared easily, sure. I hate horror movies. I can't even get through one without needing to leave a light on. But I've never thought of myself as superstitious. But this was different. This wasn't her being dramatic or jumpy. It wasn't just a bad dream. She would bolt upright in bed, sometimes clawing at her sheets, her chest rising and falling so fast I thought she was about to hyperventilate. Her eyes would go wide, and she'd be completely out of it for a few seconds, like she was seeing something I couldn't. Every time I tried to comfort her, she'd just breathe hard and stare at one spot. Always the same direction, like something had just been standing over her. Eventually, she'd blink a few times, look at me like she was just realizing she was in our room, and then she'd lie back down and try to sleep again. Sometimes it took her an hour to settle. The first time it happened, I thought maybe it was a stress reaction. She'd been working a lot, pulling late nights for a project. But even when the project ended and her schedule returned to normal, the episodes didn't stop. In fact, they got worse. She started waking up almost every night, always around the same time, always staring at the same space in the room, always pale, shaking, and covered in sweat. I started staying up later. I'd lie in bed pretending to sleep, waiting to see if it would happen again. It always did. She never screamed like in movies. It wasn't loud. It was like she was gasping, sometimes whispering something I couldn't hear. One night, I caught her whispering a tear over and over before she even opened her eyes. Afterwards, she'd try to explain what she'd seen. She didn't like talking about it much, but over time she admitted it was always the same thing. Some kind of dark figure. She said it looked like a person, but also didn't. Not shaped like someone standing there normally. More like a blotch. Like when you spill something and the outline sort of resembles a person if you squint. She said it didn't move. It would just be there at the edge of the bed, leaning slightly over her, watching. She never described any facial features. No sounds, just a heavy feeling, a weight in the air, a kind of pressure on her chest. She told me it wasn't sleep paralysis. She could move. She just didn't want to. She felt frozen from fear, like her body didn't belong to her. We looked up all kinds of things. I checked books, online articles, even forums. Everything from night terrors to hypnagogic hallucinations. The most common explanations pointed to stress or irregular sleep cycles or a trick of the mind when you're hovering between sleep and wakefulness. It sounded plausible enough, logical, scientific, but something about it still felt off. The weirdest part, the part that really stuck with me, was that it only happened to her. I never saw anything, never felt anything. The few times I woke up, right after she did, I didn't notice anything in the room. But she was always staring at something. I'm not proud to say this, but I started to resent the nights. I'd go to bed tense, expecting her to wake up screaming. And when she didn't, I'd wake up in the middle of the night anyway, just waiting for it. I'd lie there with my heart pounding, listening to her breathing, watching for any movement. I was getting less sleep than she was. And I'm afraid of the dark. Not just in a general way, but truly uncomfortable when the lights are off. It's always been that way, even as an adult. I keep night lights in the hallway and the bathroom. I always double check that there's a light switch within reach. I don't watch horror movies if I can help it. I watched The Ring once in college, and I couldn't sleep with the TV in the room for a week. My mind just isn't built for that kind of stuff. But I love my wife, and seeing her suffer every night like that, seeing her grow more exhausted and scared of sleep, it did something to me. The fear started turning into anger. Not at her, at whatever this thing was, if it even was anything, real or imagined. It was hurting her, and I couldn't stand it. One night, after yet another episode, I told her I wanted to switch sides of the bed. I didn't say why. She didn't ask. We just traded places. I laid there in the dark, staring up at the ceiling. Our room was silent. The only sound was the faint ticking from the clock on her nightstand. I let my eyes adjust and looked toward her usual side. I could still see her outline, her back rising and falling softly. That side of the bed always felt colder, but I told myself it was just a vent placement. Still, it was strange how different it felt, as if the space held something, even when she wasn't panicking. I tried to sleep, but couldn't. So I lay there and did something I'd never done before. I started repeating a thought in my head, over and over. Not like a prayer, more like a challenge, like I was preparing for a fight. I just kept thinking, bring it, you son of a bitch. Again and again. Bring it. I'm here now. I felt ridiculous at first, but the longer I did it, the more focused I became. My body relaxed, but my mind was locked onto that phrase. It was like I was daring something to try me. I didn't believe in monsters or ghosts or demons, but I believed in something else, maybe just raw emotion. I believed in the kind of energy that fills a person when someone they love is threatened. That sort of righteous, blind anger that doesn't care about being afraid. At some point, I fell asleep. I don't know how long I was out, but I remember waking up suddenly. Not like a groggy, slow drift into awareness. More like a jolt. Like something reached inside me and flipped a switch. My eyes flew open. The room was silent, but I knew something was there. Not in the general sense. I knew it as surely as you know the sun's out when you feel it on your skin. There was a presence. I looked up, and right above me, right asterisk above me, was something. It wasn't clear. It didn't glow or move or breathe. But I could see it. A human-shaped blotch. A void almost. Like the shape you'd get if someone dumped oil into water and it held together in the rough outline of a person. Its edges were uneven, blurry. It didn't shimmer or shift. It just was there, over me. And the feeling, God, the feeling. I didn't feel scared. Not in the way I usually would. It wasn't like in horror movies, where the music swells and your heart races from the build-up. This was different. I felt sick, like something was draining the warmth from my chest. It wasn't touching me, but it didn't have to. The air was heavy. My head felt foggy, like my thoughts were moving through syrup. But underneath it all, there was this deep, boiling anger. I don't know how to explain what happened next. I didn't scream. I didn't reach for a weapon. I didn't even move. But something in me lashed out, like a pulse of energy, but not physical. A surge of pure intention. I wasn't thinking in words anymore. I was projecting, telling it, through sheer force of will. Get out of my house. Stay away from my wife. You don't belong here. I will end you if you come near her again. It felt like I was throwing something from my mind straight into it. I had never felt anything like that before. It was a mental explosion, like all the bottled up frustration and fear of the last few months finally had a direction. And slowly, the thing started to fade. It didn't dissolve or vanish. It just seemed to lose its grip on the space around it. Like it was unraveling, or like the air around me was pushing it out. And then it was gone. I sat up, fully awake now. My heart was thudding in my chest. I felt like I had just sprinted a mile. Sweat dripped down my back, even though the room was cold. But I wasn't afraid. Not really. Just exhausted. Drained. Like I had just finished something important. I lay back down and closed my eyes. I didn't even think about what had happened. I just felt a deep calm. I fell back asleep and didn't wake up again until morning. My wife didn't wake up that night, and she hasn't had a night terror since. It's been over 2 years now. We never really talked about that night. She doesn't know what happened. I don't think she even remembers that I switched sides. She just thinks the episode stopped. Maybe she believes it was a coincidence, or her stress levels dropped. She had a few therapy sessions around that time, and maybe she thought they helped. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. I'm not saying it was a ghost. I still don't believe in that kind of thing. There's probably a psychological explanation for all of it. Maybe I was in sleep paralysis. Maybe I had absorbed her fears and my brain played it out in some intense, shared hallucination. Maybe my anger finally forced my subconscious to deal with it in a way that allowed both of us to move on. I don't know, and I don't care. What I do know is that I faced something that night. Real or imagined, I looked in the face and stood my ground. I protected her. That's all that mattered. And after that, it left us alone. At the start of the year, the doctor prescribed me a new medication called Lamogene. It was meant to help manage my type 2 bipolar disorder. I've been on it for a few weeks, slowly titrating up like they advised, and while it was doing something, I couldn't yet tell if it was the right thing. It also came with some strange side effects I couldn't ignore. I was foggy in the head sometimes. Not just tired or spacey like I was used to when my mood dipped or spiked, but this thick, disorienting fog that made everything feel a little off. I had some muscle twitches too, weird little zaps through my arms and legs like my nerves were firing at the wrong time. But I hadn't made an appointment to talk about it yet. I figured I'd give a bit longer, maybe another week or two, see if things settled. That was a mistake. My sister was away that week, studying in Sydney for university. We share a duplex, 2 mirror image units stuck together. Our neighbors on the other side of the wall close enough that you could hear muffled conversations and footsteps if everything else was quiet. But that Friday, it wasn't quiet. A party was going on next door. Not unusual for them. They were in their early 20s, always had people over on the weekends. Bass thumped through the wall, music and laughing and shouting blending into one loud, chaotic soundtrack. I didn't mind it. I've always found comfort in the presence of noise, especially when I'm alone. It makes me feel like the world is alive, like I'm not cut off. The silence has always been worse for me, especially when I'm spiraling. So I didn't complain, even though it was loud enough to rattle a glass on my dresser. I took my meds around midnight and crawled into bed. I passed out quickly, as I usually did. One thing about the Lamogene is it knocked me out cold most nights. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up again, but the noise from the party had dulled to a low murmur. Maybe it was 3 a.m. The room was mostly dark, the only light coming from the street outside where it slipped through the thin gap in my curtains. I was lying on my back, my body heavy like it gets when you're still half dreaming, when I saw the curtains moving slightly. Not swaying, just a subtle shift like someone brushing against them. Then I noticed a man standing next to my bed. He was dressed in black. No details, no face, just a shape, tall still, inches from my head. I screamed without thinking, a loud, raw burst of sound. I grabbed my pillow and flung it at him with all the energy I had. But even as I moved, something clicked in my head like a gear slipping into place. He wasn't real. It didn't make sense. The moment I acted, I knew it. I started giggling, this uncontrollable, stupid giggle like a kid who's been caught pretending. My whole body shook with it, and then I passed out. Just like that. Out cold. I woke up in the morning with the pillow still on the floor. Everything was bright, ordinary. Nothing out of place. I felt okay, but the memory of the night before hung in my head like a thick fog. I didn't really feel scared anymore. Just confused. A little embarrassed. I told my parents later in the day, just to get it off my chest. They were concerned, of course. It wasn't the kind of thing you ignore when your brain already has a history of running off course. They suggested I make a doctor's appointment. I promised I would on Monday. That night, I stayed home again. Alone. I wasn't really worried yet. I chalked the incident up to a medication side effect. That had to be it. I still felt weird, but not in the same way as the night before. The brain fog was a little heavier than usual, like my thoughts were trying to push through glue. The evening dragged out, and just before I went to bed, a storm started rolling in. Thunder off in the distance. The kind that takes a while to arrive, but you know it's going to be big. I always like storms. Rain is rare where we live, and when it does come, it comes with drama. By 1 a.m., the lightning had started in full. Bright flashes that lit up the entire room through my curtains. I pulled them open so I could watch from bed, just lying on my back and staring out into the flickering dark. My cat was going berserk, darting through the house like something was chasing her. I wasn't concerned. She always gets like that during storms, running from one room to the next like she's tracking invisible enemies. Outside, the street was mostly empty. I looked at the street light across from our house and thought, for no real reason, how weird it would be if someone suddenly appeared under it, just popped into view in the middle of the night. The thought gave me a chill, and I laughed to myself. But I still got up and pulled the curtain shut, not wanting to leave the view open anymore. The next lightning flash came just as I was closing them. Someone was standing under the streetlight. I didn't get a good look, just a silhouette, still and upright, arms at their sides. I froze, hand on the curtain, stomach dropping like I'd swallowed a rock. The next flash came and they were gone. Just the bare sidewalk again. Nothing there. I stood for another few minutes, heart pounding, staring at the spot. Then I closed the curtains all the way, turned on the hallway light, and walked the house slowly, checking the doors, making sure everything was locked. I rang my mom, not because I needed anything specific, but just because I felt wrong. I didn't want to leave the house. I told her I was fine, and I meant it. I knew, logically, it wasn't real. I kept reminding myself of that. The way you repeat a fact over and over to keep it from slipping away. But it rattled me. It scared me more than the figure by my bed had. That had been obviously unreal, something out of a dream. This felt too close to waking life. It made me wonder if I was developing something else. Something worse. My uncle has schizoaffective disorder. I've heard the stories. I've seen what it can do to someone's mind. The hallucinations. The confusion about what's real and what isn't. I couldn't shake the idea that I might be slipping into that territory. The next night, I stayed up late playing video games, trying to distract myself. I didn't want to go to bed. It was close to 5 a.m. by the time I turned everything off. The sky outside was just starting to gray. My cat, quiet now, followed me to the kitchen and watched me pour a glass of water. I walked down the hallway toward the laundry room and saw her trotting ahead of me, tail curling like she always does. I reached down to pet her and flicked on the light. Nothing. The room was empty. I stood in the doorway, the light humming softly above me, my hand still half raised. My skin crawled. I walked slowly back down the hall, past the spare room, and there she was, curled up asleep on the spare bed, completely still, eyes closed. She hadn't moved. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, lights on, trying not to spiral. Every creak of the house made me jump. I kept glancing toward the windows, half expecting to see someone standing outside again. Nothing came, but I didn't feel alone. Not in the way people usually mean it. I felt like my brain was fracturing, like reality was starting to get little cracks in it, letting in things that didn't belong. By Monday morning, I had made up my mind. I stopped taking the medication. I didn't even wait for the appointment. I knew you're not supposed to do that, but I couldn't keep putting myself through those nights. I wasn't suicidal or in a deep depressive state. I just felt like I was teetering on the edge of something that might pull me down if I didn't grab hold of the railing. It felt like survival. And the strangest thing? It all stopped. No more figures beside my bed. No more silhouettes under the streetlight. No more phantom cats in the laundry. The fog in my head lifted over the next few days, slowly at first, then more fully until I felt sharp again. Present. Real. I could see everything for what it was. My cat acted normal. The house felt empty again in a peaceful way. The silence didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt earned. I kept my doctor's appointment, told them everything. They were understanding, even grateful I came in. We talked about alternatives, about how common hallucinations can be when your body doesn't react well to certain meds. I wasn't psychotic. I wasn't becoming my uncle. I was just sensitive to a drug that pushed the wrong buttons in my brain. A misfire, a false signal. That was all. But those few nights, they've stayed with me. I don't think people who've never dealt with mental illness can truly understand what it feels like to distrust your own perception, to look at something and know it isn't there, and still feel afraid of it. It shakes something deep in you. You can't reason it away because the fear doesn't care about facts. It just sits there in your gut, cold and heavy. I've been on a different medication since then. No hallucinations, no figures, no cats in two places at once. Things feel more stable now, but I still sleep with the curtains drawn, not because I think someone will be standing under the streetlight, but because I know what it feels like to see them anyway, and that's not something you ever forget. About 10 years ago, I used to run almost every day. It wasn't anything serious, just a way to keep in shape and clear my head. I was in my mid-20s then, working a desk job that left me feeling restless most days. My favorite spot to run was a paved walking path along a river that cut through a quiet, wooded area. It wasn't far from my apartment, just a 10-minute drive, and it was close to a park that had a small lot near some soccer fields. It was a peaceful place. I rarely saw anyone out there besides an occasional dog walker or cyclist. The parking lot was nearly always empty, which I liked. There was something calming about pulling in and seeing nothing but trees and an open field around me. I'd park in the same spot almost every time, third space from the end, shaded by a big oak that leaned slightly toward the lot. It became part of the routine. I liked routines. The path itself wasn't anything fancy, just a stretch of blacktop that followed the riverbank for a couple of miles before looping around and reconnecting with the main park road. It wasn't well lit or busy, which was part of the appeal. I usually ran in the late afternoon when the light was starting to soften, but there was still plenty of visibility. Some days I'd go later, around sunset, especially during the warmer months. I liked that hour when the sun dipped low and threw long shadows through the trees. Everything felt calm. Still, it was a good way to reset. This one particular day, it had been hotter than usual. I remember the way the sun had baked the pavement, the way the heat hung low over the fields like a haze. I had worked late and didn't get to the trail until nearly 7 p.m. I almost didn't go, but I needed to clear my head. I had been sitting in front of a screen all day and my legs were stiff, my eyes tired. So I threw on some shorts, filled my water bottle, and headed out. The lot was empty when I arrived. Completely empty. Not a single car in sight. Just me and that big oak tree. I parked, stretched out beside the car for a minute, then made my way to the trail. The air smelled like cut grass and river mud. A sharp, earthy smell I'd gotten used to over the months of running here. A few birds chirped in the trees, but otherwise, it was quiet. Peaceful. I put in my earbuds, turned on a playlist, and started my usual route. The run was nothing unusual. I remember noticing how dry the path looked, how the cracks in the pavement were wider than normal from the heat. The river was low too, barely moving, with patches of rocks showing in the shallow spots. I passed the halfway mark, turned around, and started heading back toward the lot. The light was fading quicker than I expected, dipping behind the tree line and casting the trail in soft blue shadows. It wasn't dark yet, but I picked up my pace anyway. I didn't like being out there once the sun fully disappeared. Too many places to trip. Too easy to miss someone else coming up behind you. When I got back to the lot, it was still empty, or at least I thought it was at first. As I walked across the gravel toward my car, I noticed another vehicle. A van. It was parked directly next to mine on the driver's side, even though the rest of the lot was wide open. No reason to park that close, not with all that space. It was a white panel van, the kind without any side windows. Just a sliding door and tinted front windows. The kind of van you always see in those true crime documentaries. The ones that make your stomach feel weird for no good reason. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone else had just arrived for a walk. Maybe they liked that spot by the oak tree too. But something felt off. There was no one on the trail behind me. I would have seen them, and I hadn't passed anyone else either. Still, I didn't want to overthink it. I walked to my car like normal, trying to ignore the strange tightness creeping into my chest. As I reached my driver's side door, I saw that there was someone sitting inside the van. A man, alone. He was in the driver's seat, just sitting there. Not reading anything, not looking at his phone, just staring forward through the windshield. I gave a small polite nod, a reflex, really, and opened my door. He didn't smile or nod back. He just stared. I got in, started the engine, and backed out slowly. I didn't look over at the van again. I didn't want to. I pulled out of the lot and headed toward the park exit. The gravel crunched under my tires as I rolled over the narrow drive. In the rearview mirror, I saw the van pull out too. No hesitation. Just right behind me, like it had been waiting for me to leave. Still, I told myself not to panic. It could be coincidence. Maybe he lived in the area too. Maybe he was just heading home. I turned onto the main road, tried to shake the tension that had started to build in my shoulders. The van stayed behind me. I drove a little slower than normal, checking my mirrors more than I usually did. Every turn I took, the van followed. Same distance behind. Not close enough to be aggressive, but not far enough to feel like just another car on the road. I reached the first big intersection and turned left. The van turned too, still behind me. I tried to think clearly. If this guy was following me, I didn't want to go straight home. That was the last place I wanted him to know. I lived alone in a small apartment complex near the edge of town. Quiet, out of the way, too easy for someone to wait around unnoticed. I made another turn, this time down a road that looped around a shopping plaza. It wasn't the fastest way home, but it was one of those turns I made sometimes to avoid traffic. He followed. That's when I really started to worry. I took another turn, then another, going into a neighborhood I didn't usually drive through. I looped around blocks, cutting through side streets, checking my mirrors at every corner. The van stayed with me. At one point, I slowed at a stop sign and counted the seconds. He did too. Exact pace. No passing. No deviation. I started taking sharper turns, ones that didn't make sense for someone heading anywhere in particular. I drove down a cul-de-sac, turned around, and came back out. The van did the same. I could feel my heart racing now, beating against my ribs like it was trying to warn me. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up. I knew I had to lose him. I couldn't just keep circling until I ran out of gas. I needed to get somewhere with people. Lights. Cameras, maybe. A place where he wouldn't want to follow. I turned toward the main strip where some of the big stores and gas stations were. I figured if I pulled into a well-lit place, maybe with security cameras or other people around, I could make it obvious I was aware of him. I pulled into the parking lot of a big grocery store, circling to the front where the lights were brightest. There were a few people coming in and out, cars parked across the lot. I parked near the doors and stayed in the car, watching the road behind me. The van didn't pull in. It slowed, turned into the entrance like it was going to follow, then kept going. Just kept driving. I watched as it rolled past, out the other exit, and disappeared down the road. I waited a few more minutes, staring at the spot where it had gone, my hands still gripping the wheel. My mouth was dry. My shirt was damp from the run and now stuck to my back. I could feel the sweat under my arms, cold now instead of warm. After maybe 5 minutes, I started the car again and drove slowly around the block. No sign of the van. I checked every side street, every gas station lot. Nothing. It was gone. I didn't go home right away. I drove for another half hour, just circling around, making sure I wasn't being followed. Every time a white vehicle showed up in my mirror, my stomach clenched, but none of them stayed long. No one followed me. Eventually, I drove home, parked in the farthest spot from my apartment, and sat in the car for a while, just listening to the ticking sound of the engine cooling down. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept replaying the moment he pulled out of the lot behind me. The way he parked so close, even when he didn't need to. The way he just sat there in a van, not doing anything, just waiting. I never went back to that trail. Not once. I found a new place to run, an indoor gym with cameras, other people, and a front desk where someone always sat. It wasn't the same. I missed the fresh air and the quiet. But I didn't want to take that risk again. Even now, years later, I still don't like empty parking lots. I don't like white vans. And I always check my mirrors when I leave somewhere quiet, especially if there's someone parked close by. I never saw that van again. I never found out who he was or what he wanted. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But it didn't feel like it. I know what it feels like to be followed. I know what it feels like to be watched. I felt it that night, every turn I took, every time I tried to lose him. And whatever he was planning, I wasn't going to stick around long enough to find out. Sometimes people ask why I stopped running outdoors. I just tell them I got tired of the bugs or the heat. I don't tell them about the van. I don't tell them how close it got, but I still think about it. Every time I park somewhere quiet, every time I glance in the mirror and wonder who's behind me, I still think about it. I probably always will. When I think back to that time in my life, I barely recognize the person I used to be. It feels like remembering someone else entirely, like watching an old home video of a stranger whose body I happened to borrow for a few years. I was 17. My entire world had collapsed under the weight of something I thought would be permanent. My first real relationship. We'd been together for over a year, and at that age, that kind of time feels eternal. It feels binding, like a promise carved into the foundation of everything you are. And when it ended, I didn't just feel heartbroken. I felt hollowed out. I didn't sleep much. I barely ate. I stopped speaking to people. My room became my only refuge. And even there, I couldn't escape what was happening in my head. Everything reminded me of her. The songs on my playlist, the clothes I wore, the places in town I used to love. Even food tasted like nothing. Nothing made me feel anything. And that's what scared me the most. I couldn't cry, couldn't get angry, couldn't laugh. The world kept going, people kept smiling and talking, and I just moved through it like a ghost. At first, I thought I was just going through the normal stages of grief, but weeks turned into months, and I just kept slipping further. I didn't talk to my parents about it. I didn't talk to anyone. And the longer I kept it to myself, the more it festered. I'd lay in bed for hours staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever care about anything again. I'd imagine walking into traffic just to feel the rush of fear, just to confirm I could still feel anything at all. That's the kind of thinking that crept into everything I did. I didn't want to die exactly. I just didn't care if I did. That numbness turned into something dangerous, recklessness. I started doing things on impulse, like skipping school just to walk around unfamiliar neighborhoods. I once climbed onto the roof of a friend's garage and just sat there until it got dark, staring out at the town, imagining what it would be like to disappear. Another time, I drove to the edge of the county and stood near the train tracks, waiting for one to come by just so I could feel the ground shake. I wasn't doing these things for attention. I wasn't thinking about who would care or who might try to stop me. I wasn't thinking at all. That was the problem. At the time, I had a part-time job at a hardware store about 15 minutes from home. I hated the job, but I kept going because I needed some sense of routine. The mornings were always the hardest. I'd sit at the edge of my bed, dressed but paralyzed, staring at the floor for 10 or 20 minutes before forcing myself to leave. Every day felt like another performance, pretending to function, pretending I was still tethered to the world around me. And then came that morning, the one that never leaves me. It was early, still cold and damp. The kind of morning where the dew clings to everything and the sky is the same shade of pale gray for hours. I didn't sleep the night before. I lay there all night, my thoughts rolling over and over the same dead ends. At some point, I got up, threw on whatever clothes were closest to the bed, and headed to the door. I didn't eat. I didn't look at myself in the mirror. I barely even noticed the air on my skin. I stepped outside and didn't pause like I usually did. Normally, I would sit behind the wheel for a few moments, just gathering the will to move. But not that day. That day, I walked out, opened the car door, sat down, turned the key, and threw it into reverse like it was one fluid motion. No breath, no hesitation. I floored it. Not gently backed out, not carefully checked the mirrors. I hit the gas like I wanted to rip the car out of the driveway in one violent motion, like I wanted to snap something in the world. And then the car stopped. Not because of a crash. I hit the brake at the edge of the driveway without even knowing why. It was like my body did it without telling me. I remember the sudden jolt as the car rocked slightly from momentum and the deep, awful quiet that followed. The engine was still humming and the radio was on low, but the air felt suffocating. I turned my head, and there they were. A woman, a child, a stroller. They hadn't screamed. There was no sound. Just this frozen second in time where the three of us existed in perfect stillness. The stroller was angled just slightly in front of my car, close enough that I could have reached out my window and touched the handlebar. The baby, maybe a year old, was staring off, oblivious. The mother had one hand on the handle and the other still in the air, like she had thrown it up in shock. Her face, I'll never forget it. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide and wet. We locked eyes for only a second, maybe even less than that, but it felt like everything paused around that moment. I saw something in her expression I'd never seen before, pure, unfiltered terror. Not for herself, but for her child. And then I did something that still makes me sick to my stomach. I drove off. I didn't check to see if they were okay. I didn't pull over to apologize. I didn't even let myself think. I just pressed the gas and disappeared down the road, like a coward. I don't even know how I made it to work that day. I parked like normal, walked in, and clocked in as if nothing had happened. But I wasn't there. Not really. I spent the entire shift trapped inside my head, replaying that moment over and over again. The stroller, her face, the sound of the tires, the distance between us, no more than a few inches. That was it. Just a few inches, and I would have changed everything. I would have destroyed 3 lives in an instant. Hers, her child's, and my own. When my shift ended, I sat in the parking lot for a long time. I didn't turn on the car. I didn't even reach for my phone. I just sat there, staring at my hands on the steering wheel. They were shaking. The weight of it hit me all at once. Not just what had happened, but what could have happened. How close I came to doing something irreversible. How little I had cared that morning, and how that lack of care had almost cost a mother her child. How my numbness, my sadness, had spilled out into the world in a way I never thought possible. It scared the hell out of me. It was the first time in months that I'd felt something real. Not a vague discomfort or dull ache, but a full body panic that seemed to shake me from the inside out. I wasn't invincible. I wasn't just floating above the world, hurting only myself. I was part of it, and whether I liked it or not, my actions mattered. My choices had consequences. I could hurt people. I almost did. That was the turning point for me. I didn't suddenly become better overnight. That kind of healing doesn't happen in a day, or a week, or even a month. But that moment was the beginning. I started talking to someone, an old guidance counselor who recommended a therapist. I started trying to explain the darkness I'd been carrying around, even if I couldn't always find the words. I forced myself to be more careful, to slow down, to check and double check everything I did. I wanted to stay tethered to the present moment, no matter how heavy it felt. I still had days where the weight crept back in, where I wanted to lie in bed and vanish. But I reminded myself of that stroller, that woman's eyes, the baby who didn't even know how close the world had come to changing forever. I think about them a lot. I never saw them again. I sometimes wonder if the mother thinks about that morning, if it haunts her like it haunts me, if she tells the story to friends, shaking her head at how lucky they were, if she ever recognized my car driving through town, if she remembers my face the way I remember hers. I don't expect forgiveness, not from her or from myself. That morning isn't something I can undo. It happened. It lives in the timeline of my life as a permanent marker, but also saved me. It forced me to confront the truth I've been avoiding for so long, that depression doesn't exist in a vacuum, that my pain, when left unchecked, had started to leak out into the world in dangerous ways. That being sad didn't excuse being careless, that even if I didn't care about my life, I couldn't afford to stop caring about other people's. In a way, that day became a dividing line. Before it, I was drifting hollow and self-destructive. After it, I started trying to come back. Slowly, painfully, and with more mistakes than I'd like to admit. But I came back. Years have passed. I'm not that kid anymore. I've loved and lost again. I've learned how to sit with pain without letting it define me. I've learned how to ask for help. I've learned that feelings aren't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes they're quiet and buried, and you have to dig them out piece by piece. But I've never forgotten the sound of my tires coming to a stop that morning. I've never forgotten how close I came to ruining 3 lives. And I never will. Just this past August, my brother and I were packing up for a road trip to Canada. We'd been planning it for months, not some elaborate tour or anything, just the two of us hitting the road, crossing the border, spending some time in the cool air by the lakes, maybe camping along the way. He had just finished a big project at work, and I had saved up enough time off to disappear for a week or so. The idea was to leave early the next morning, before sunrise, actually, so that we'd make good time on the highways before the weekend traffic kicked in. We had most of our stuff ready to go. The back of the car was already packed tight with 2 coolers, a camping stove, bags of clothes, sleeping bags, and all the usual junk. All that was left was to grab a few last-minute things from the store: snacks, batteries for our flashlights, extra fuel canisters, and a first aid kit I'd forgotten we didn't have. We figured it would be a quick run. It was a warm evening, the sun low but still hanging in the sky like it wasn't ready to give into night just yet. That time of summer where the air feels heavy with humidity and the asphalt radiates heat even after the sun has passed over it. We were driving along Dunrobin Road, just a few blocks from our house, when we saw the dog for the first time. It was a small, fluffy white thing. Looked like a Maltese or maybe a mix of something similar. He was wandering along the edge of the road, sniffing the grass, stopping now and then to paw at something unseen. His tail bounced with every step. I didn't think too much of it. Where we live, people don't always leash their dogs. It's one of those neighborhoods where the houses sit on half-acre lots, and the streets curve and weave like they were drawn by someone drunk. He didn't seem in distress. There was no one with him, but he looked clean and well-fed. His coat was bright and didn't look matted or dirty. For all we knew, he had just darted out of his yard while someone opened the gate to take out the trash. I glanced at him as we passed, then focused back on the road. We didn't even talk about him at the time. We hit the store about 10 minutes later, walked the aisles grabbing what we needed. I remember standing in the camping section for way too long, trying to choose between 2 different multi-tools, only to realize neither had the one feature I actually needed: a proper saw blade. My brother loaded the cart with jerky, granola bars, and more bottled water than I thought we'd need. We grabbed some Gatorades for the cooler and a big bag of ice. We were on our way back, both of us tired already, eager to get home and crash before the long drive tomorrow. The light had shifted just a bit, more orange now, deeper shadows stretching across the streets. The heat was still thick, but the edge of evening had started to settle in. And then we saw him again, the same little white dog. Only this time, he was far from where we first saw him. Much farther, at least a 15-minute walk from where he had been. Now he was right up near the edge of a 4-lane road, tail still wagging, looking like he didn't have a care in the world. The traffic was heavier here, cars pushing past in long bursts, rushing to get home before dark. Something in me tightened immediately. I slowed the car, pulled off into the gravel shoulder without even thinking about it. We both looked at each other and had the same thought. No one was around. There wasn't a single person calling for him or trailing behind trying to catch him. It felt wrong, like he'd slipped through the cracks of someone's fence and just kept walking, and no one even noticed yet. I opened the door and stepped out. The heat from the pavement came up fast against my legs. I could hear the sound of tires against the road, loud in the space between houses. The dog had moved further away, his head low, nose to the ground, as he sniffed something in the grass along the opposite sidewalk. I whistled softly. He looked up at me, head tilted, ears perked, and for a second I thought he might come trotting over. But instead, his whole posture changed. He crouched slightly, then bounded away from me, back toward the open sidewalk. Not in fear. Not really. More like play. Like a game. That worried me even more. I didn't want to startle him into running into the road, so I stopped walking and backed up a little. But he kept going, drifting toward the edge of the intersection. He wasn't paying attention to the cars. He didn't even look up when one zoomed past, just inches from his tail. I called out again, but this time he barely glanced back. I turned and started walking back to the car when I heard my brother mutter something. I looked over at him and saw that he had already crossed to the other side of the road, trying to cut the dog off. And then everything moved too fast. The dog veered suddenly, tail still wagging, darting toward my brother, maybe recognizing him as someone familiar, maybe just changing direction on a whim. He was fast, quicker than I expected. He crossed one lane cleanly, then another. But in the third lane, just before the median, a black SUV came around the bend. No screech of brakes. No time. The impact wasn't loud. Not like in the movies. More of a wet, heavy thump. The dog let out one sharp yelp and collapsed, his hind legs folding beneath him. He twitched once, urinated on the pavement, and then went still. I stood there, frozen. I didn't even realize my mouth was open until the dryness hit the back of my throat. My brother stood across the road, motionless, staring down at what was left of the little white dog. The SUV had stopped briefly, maybe for a second or two, then continued down the road. Whether they knew what had happened or didn't care, I'll never know. I don't even remember crossing the road. One moment I was standing by the car, and the next I was kneeling beside the dog. His body was still warm, but it was obvious he was gone. His lower half was ruined. Bones crushed flat, back legs bent at wrong angles. But his face looked the same. Eyes half open, mouth slightly parted like he was still panting. I picked him up gently. I don't know why. Maybe to move him off the street, or maybe because I didn't want to just leave him there. I held him close, trying not to let anything shift, and carried him back to the car. I could feel his body stiffening by the minute. My hand shook. My brother got in silently, and we sat for a moment before he reached out and took the tags from the dog's collar. There was a small metal bone-shaped tag with a name, Buddy, and an address, just a few blocks away. We drove there in silence. The sun was almost gone now, only a sliver of light bleeding across the sky. Street lamps had flickered on. Crickets had started up in the grass. It should have been peaceful. The house was small, old, with a crooked porch and faded blue paint. Toys littered the yard. Plastic dinosaurs, a tricycle, a deflated soccer ball. My brother didn't move, so I got out and carried the dog up the walk. I felt sick. My throat was tight, and I could feel the weight of what was about to happen pressing down hard on my chest. I rang the doorbell once. A woman answered, middle-aged, in a bathrobe, hair pulled back messily like she hadn't planned on anyone showing up tonight. She looked confused, then down at what I was holding. And then everything broke. She collapsed to her knees before I could even say anything. Her face twisted into something I can't even describe properly. Grief and disbelief tangled into a sound that came out of her like a howl. Her hands reached out, trembling, and touched his fur. I stood there, still holding her dead dog, as she broke apart in front of me. I wanted to put him down, to ease him into her arms, but she didn't move to take him. She just kept sobbing and whispering words I didn't want to hear. My brother joined me after a few moments, and we stood there awkwardly until a man, probably her husband, appeared in the doorway behind her and took over. He thanked us with a nod, took the dog from my arms, and led her back inside. We didn't wait for anything else. There was nothing left to say or do. We turned, walked back to the car, and drove home. Neither of us spoke that night. We didn't pack the rest of our stuff. We didn't even eat dinner. I sat on my bed for a long time, staring at the floor, going over everything that had happened. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that flash of white fur, the blur of the SUV, the limp body in the road. The trip still happened. We left the next morning like we planned, but something felt different. Quieter. The kind of silence that has weight to it. We talked less than usual. Listened to the radio more. I thought about that dog every time we passed another stray on the road. Every time I saw a leash in someone's hand or a tail wagging in the distance. That image didn't leave me for weeks. And that woman's face, her reaction, that's what stayed the most. I'd never seen someone crumble like that. So immediate. So raw. It was like watching someone's heart break in real time. I hope I never see something like it again. It wasn't just a dog to her. It was something else. Maybe the last piece of something she lost. Maybe a companion through some hard time. You can never really know what someone's holding on to until it's torn away. I think about it still, especially at night. How fast it happened. How something so small, so full of life, could just be gone in seconds. And the worst part? We were trying to help. That's what cuts the deepest. We were trying to do the right thing. But sometimes, even when your heart's in the right place, the world doesn't care. Sometimes the road wins, and it doesn't let you forget it. I still remember that Halloween night like it happened last week. Not because something obviously terrifying happened, but because it was one of those rare moments where everything felt wrong, and you could feel it in your skin, in your hands on the steering wheel, in the silence that filled the car after it was all over. I was 22 back then, just old enough that the excitement of Halloween was fading for me, but my younger sister and her group of high school friends were still chasing the thrill. They had this idea to go check out a haunted house they had heard about from some kids at school. The kind of story that spreads every October. Old house on a country road, abandoned for years, weird noises, windows lighting up on their own, that kind of thing. They begged me to drive them because I was the only one with a license and a car big enough to carry everyone. I said yes because I didn't have anything else going on, and truth be told, I didn't mind doing something different. Plus, I figured it would all just be some rundown building that would give them a scare, and then I'd get to feel like the responsible older sibling while they screamed and laughed. We left just after sunset. I remember the air had that sharp chill that comes when fall is starting to feel more like winter, the kind of cold that makes the seats in the car feel like stone until the heat kicks in. The sky was clear, with the kind of deep purple you only get on cloudless October nights. I had a thermos of coffee in the cup holder, and the girls were packed in the back seat, layered in sweatshirts and cheap Halloween makeup. They were talking fast, feeding off each other's nervous energy, passing around somebody's mom's leftover candy in a zip-top bag. I wasn't really listening, just half focused on the road, half listening to the wind push through the open crack of my window. They said the house was just outside town, down a side road that curved around a small lake and dead-ended near some woods. I hadn't been down that way in years, not since some bonfire parties when I was in high school. And even then, I didn't remember any house like the one they were describing. But I figured maybe it had been built more recently, or maybe I'd just forgotten. We drove about 15 miles out of town before we turned off the main road onto a narrow strip of cracked pavement that barely had a name on the GPS. The trees were dense here, crowding the edges of the road, and the moonlight came through in scattered pieces like it was being filtered through lace. After a while, the road straightened out, and there was a break in the trees. The field they had talked about was just off to the right, wide and flat and empty. But there was no house, just dry, waist-high grass moving in the wind, and the remains of what looked like an old stone foundation half buried in the dirt. I slowed the car to a crawl, headlights sweeping over the field, expecting to see something, anything, that matched the story. But there was nothing. No porch, no mailbox, no signs of a driveway. Just the open field stretching back into blackness. I pulled the car over for a moment, just off the road, and we sat there, everyone quiet for the first time. I could tell they were confused, and honestly, so was I. I got out, walked to the edge of the field with my phone light on, and scanned the area. Nothing, just grass and brush, and the outline of a crumbling stone rectangle that maybe used to be part of a wall. There weren't even tire tracks in grass. It looked like no one had walked out here in years. I figured they'd gotten the location wrong. It wouldn't be the first time a roomer got the street wrong by a few miles. I turned the car around and kept driving down the road, hoping maybe we'd pass something that made more sense. But we didn't get far. Maybe a half-mile further, the road dipped down and crossed a small creek. Or it used to. The bridge that had once spanned, it was completely gone. Not just blocked off or under repair gone. It looked like it had been washed out a long time ago. There were chunks of concrete lying in the water like someone had dropped them from a plane, and the road just ended in mud and weeds. A single rusted-out barrier with faded caution tape sat crooked at the edge, like a warning that had been ignored too many times. There was no way forward, so I backed the car into a three-point turn and headed back the way we came. I remember how quiet it was then. Nobody was talking, the radio was off, and the only sound were the tires over the pavement and the hum of the engine. I was half annoyed, thinking we'd just wasted gas chasing a ghost story, and I figured they were all just embarrassed that it turned out to be nothing. But then something happened that I still can't explain in a way that makes any sense. We were coming up to the spot where we'd first stopped, the field with the missing house, when something caught my eye. The headlights hit something that reflected back at us. Not just the flat glint of dew on grass or the glass of a beer bottle, but something wide and flat and smooth. I slowed down without thinking, foot easing off the gas, and the car rolled forward just enough to bring it into full view. There it was, the house, a large, two-story structure sitting exactly where we'd looked earlier, not 100 feet off the road. It wasn't old and broken like you'd expect from an abandoned place. The wood siding was dark but intact. The front porch was wide, with columns holding up a roof that stretched across its length. Windows lined the front wall, reflecting our headlights back at us like mirrors. The front door was closed. No lights were on inside. We all just sat there, frozen in the car, staring. I remember gripping the wheel tighter, like I was bracing for something, though I had no idea what. How the hell had we missed it earlier? We'd stopped at the exact same spot. I had walked up to the edge of the field. There was nothing. Now here it was, clear as day in our high beams. A whole house doesn't just appear out of nowhere. I was about to put the car in reverse and maybe get out again when I saw something in the rearview mirror. Headlights. A single pair, coming up fast behind us. At first, I thought it was just another car, maybe someone out for a Halloween drive, maybe somebody who lived nearby. But then I remembered the bridge. The bridge wasn't there. I had turned around because the road was gone. There was no way a car could have come from that direction. But it did. The car behind us reached the bend where the road had dropped off and the bridge had been washed away. Except it didn't stop. It kept coming, fast and smooth, headlights glowing, engine silent. I watched in the mirror as it cleared the spot where the bridge should have been and rolled up behind us like it had crossed over solid ground. Something snapped in me then, not fear exactly, but a raw instinct. I didn't wait. I hit the gas and pulled away from the house, tires kicking up dirt and gravel. The car surged forward and I didn't look back. I drove straight back toward town, the road twisting and narrowing, trees closing in again. The girls didn't make a sound. No one asked questions. No one laughed. Just the sound of my engine and my own shallow breathing as I kept my eyes on the road and tried not to think about what I had just seen. By the time we reached the lights of town, the headlights behind us were gone. I didn't stop until we were back in my driveway, and even then I sat with the engine running for a while, hands shaking on the wheel. The silence in the car was heavier than anything I'd ever felt. Nobody wanted to be the first to break it. Eventually, when the girls got out, then the others followed. My sister got out last. I turned off the engine and sat in the dark for a few more minutes before finally going inside. We didn't talk about it much after that. I think we all decided it was easier to let it fade into the background. Maybe we thought we'd misremembered. Maybe we convinced ourselves it was just the weird lighting or nerves or too much sugar and caffeine. Maybe we told ourselves the bridge wasn't really gone, and we just imagined that part. It was easier than trying to explain it to anyone else. Years have passed since then. I moved out of town, got a job, started a life somewhere else. My sister's grown up now, has a family of her own. Every now and then, when we're together and the conversation turns to Halloween stories, someone will mention that night. We laugh about it now. We make jokes about haunted houses and disappearing roads. We talk about how scared we were, how the car ride home was the quietest we've ever been in our lives. But even now, all these years later, I've never driven back down that road. I never looked up the history of that place or asked around about the bridge. I don't want to know what really happened that night. Maybe there's an explanation for it. Maybe the house was just hidden by shadows. Maybe the bridge was temporarily repaired. Maybe the car came from a private path we didn't see. But I've driven in fog, in storms, on ice through power outages. I've seen shadows move and heard strange sounds in the dark. None of that ever made me feel what I felt that night. What we all felt sitting there in that car, watching a house appear from nothing and a car come from nowhere. That kind of silence doesn't come from being scared. It comes from knowing something is wrong in a way you can't fix. That was the most silent car ride home I've ever been in. And it still echoes in my head every time October rolls around. It was the middle of summer in the South. You could feel the humidity press against your skin like a wet blanket, even in the late hours of the evening. The air felt thick, soupy, almost like you had to wade through it just to move from one room to another. The rain had come down hard earlier that day. One of those sudden afternoon storms that leave steam rising from the pavement the moment the clouds move on. I lived in a small garage apartment behind someone else's house. It was one of those setups where the owners had converted the space above a detached garage into a studio with just enough room for one person. And even then, only if you didn't mind sacrificing a bit of comfort. The place was decent enough. Old, with creaky wooden floors and windows that didn't seal all the way. The screens were thin and bent in a few places, but they kept most things out. Or so I thought. The apartment was built with a kind of deck or carport structure that stretched right outside the windows. It wasn't something I ever really used. The wood was worn and splintered, with nails rusted and sticking up in odd places, and even though it hadn't collapsed under its own weight yet, it never felt quite solid. Still, it was there, and after the rain cleared up that afternoon, I figured I might as well sweep it off. The leaves from the nearby oaks and sweet gum trees had blown all over it. Wet leaves, twigs, the occasional cigarette, but probably tossed from the main house's back porch. I grabbed an old broom from behind the door and stepped out onto the deck. The wood was slick underfoot, and it gave slightly with each step like it was just barely holding itself together. I stayed close to the windows, sweeping the leaves off in slow, careful motions. As I worked, the air buzzed with the sound of cicadas in the trees. I kept an eye out for spiders or wasps nesting in the corners, but nothing jumped out at me. After 20 minutes or so, I called it good enough and went back inside. That night, it was too hot to sleep with the windows closed. Even with the fan going, the air inside the apartment felt like it had been cooked. I cracked the windows open all the way and hoped the thin screens would keep the bugs out. I lay in bed in nothing but shorts, sticky with sweat, and dozed off to the sound of crickets outside and the occasional creak of the old wood settling beneath me. Sometime around midnight, I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why. It felt like one of those sudden jolts you get when your brain decides it needs to check your surroundings. The fan was still humming, the night still thick and dark. But then I heard it. A buzzing, high-pitched, and uneven, like something flying in tight circles. I thought maybe a fly had gotten in somehow, or a mosquito, but then it got louder. There was more than one. The sound filled the air near the windows, and I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Then something brushed my face, just barely like the tip of a feather, but but it was enough to make me jerk. My heart kicked into gear instantly. Before I could even sit up, I felt something else land on my chest. I reached up instinctively to brush it away, but scurried down my arm before I could touch it. I sat up fast, panic flooding my body, and switched on the small lamp on the table by the bed. That's when I saw them. Hundreds of cockroaches. Big ones. The kind that can fly. They were everywhere. Crawling up the walls, along the baseboards, across the floor. They streamed in through the windows like the screens weren't even there. Like the screens were just an illusion. They came in waves, flying and crawling, wings buzzing and legs skittering across every surface. A few darted across my bed, disappearing under the covers. One flew directly at the light and smacked against the bulb with a sickening thud before dropping to the floor and flipping over, legs twitching. I jumped off the bed, yelling without thinking, trying to shake off anything that might still be on me. I ran to the center of the room, then to the corner, spinning in circles, swatting at my arms, chest, legs. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. One was in my hair. I slapped at my head, feeling it wriggle as it fought to stay attached. I finally dislodged it, and it fell to the floor, then instantly took off, flying again, vanishing into the chaos around me. I tore open the front door, bolted down the stairs barefoot, and ran straight into the street. The pavement was still damp from the rain, and I could feel the grit of loose pebbles under my feet, but I didn't care. I kept running down the block, past quiet houses, under flickering streetlights, until I was sure I'd gotten them all off me. I stopped in front of someone's dark yard, panting, drenched in sweat, and God knows what else, arms wrapped around myself like I was trying to hold my skin together. The night was dead quiet, like nothing had happened. Just the sound of distant frogs and the occasional car far off in the distance. No buzzing, no fluttering. I stood there for maybe 15 minutes, too afraid to go back, too tired to keep walking. Eventually, I made my way to a friend's house a few blocks over and slept on their porch swing until sunrise. I didn't even tell them. I didn't say a word. The next morning, I returned to the apartment with a sense of dread crawling in my stomach. I expected the worst. I figured I'd find roaches everywhere, dead or alive, clinging to the walls, hiding in the furniture, coating the floor. But when I opened the door, it was spotless. Not a single roach in sight. The bed was still unmade. The lamp was still on, but the place was empty. I checked every corner. I pulled back the sheets. I looked under the dresser and behind the small fridge. Nothing. Not one. It was like it had never happened. Like it was all a hallucination brought on by the heat and exhaustion. But I knew it wasn't. My legs were still covered in scratches and tiny red welts. My arms itched from where they had climbed. I found a dead one stuck to the back of my calf, flattened and half dry, like a cruel little reminder that it had been real. I sealed the windows that same day, bought thick plastic duct tape, and pushed every old towel I had up against the sills. I sprayed every crack with bug killer until the chemical smell made my throat close up. I couldn't sleep in the bed again for weeks. I started sleeping on a fold-up lawn chair I dragged into the center of the room with all the lights on. I never opened the windows again. I still don't know why it happened. Maybe the rain flooded a nest and they were looking for higher ground. Maybe sweeping the deck disturbed some hidden colony. Maybe the apartment was always just one warm night away from an infestation, and that night the temperature and moisture and air pressure all lined up just right. All I know is that it only happened once. One night. One unforgettable, skin-crawling night. But that was enough. Years later, even now, every time I hear that familiar buzzing in the summer air, I freeze. I check the windows. I check the floor. I feel phantom legs crawling up my arms. I never saw them again, but I never forgot, and I never opened those windows again. I'm late as shit to this party, but I'm sure nobody else will mind. Or maybe they will. I don't know. I guess it's kind of fitting, though. I've been dragging my feet about writing this out for a long time. Years, honestly. It's one of those memories that sticks in the back of your head like a thumbtack you forgot about until you lean on it wrong. Then it's there again, sharp and immediate, like it never left. Sometimes it just floats up out of nowhere, like an oil slick breaking the surface of my day. Sometimes it's in my dreams, but it's always the same. It never changes. No matter how much older I get, no matter how many new things I've seen or learned or experienced, that moment comes back to me untouched, unchanged, like it was burned into me before I even knew what memory was. I don't remember much about being little. I think I was 2, maybe 3. Could have been 4, but that feels like a stretch. It's hard to say exactly how old I was. Everything from that part of my life is a blur except for this one thing. I know I was small, still carried in one of those baby harnesses that strap a kid to your chest. That kind of young. That's how my dad had me that day, strapped to the front of him like a backpack in reverse. I don't even remember where we were coming from or what the trip was for. Just that we were driving to Anchorage and my uncle was with us, sitting up front while my dad drove. If you've ever driven out to Anchorage from anywhere south, you know the road I'm talking about. Long, flat, and straight, running through stretches of swampy wilderness. It's the kind of place where the air smells like wet grass and mud, even inside the car. The kind of road that makes you zone out. Trees and water mile after mile. No curves to wake you up. No towns or buildings or signs. Just asphalt, sky, and swamp. It was just another day. Bright out, a little overcast, but not dark. We were going along at a normal pace. Nothing fast, nothing reckless. I think we had the windows down. I remember the feel of wind on my face, that soft buffeting when you're little and don't really know where it's coming from. I was probably asleep until the moment it happened. Then, sudden, violent movement. A jerk, a crunching noise that sounded too loud for the world, like metal screaming and bones breaking all at once. My memory doesn't hold sound well from that age, but I still feel that noise in my spine. I feel the lurch of the car, the sudden stop, and I remember the motorcyclist. He came out of nowhere. There was no warning, no headlights in the distance, no rev of an engine approaching. 1 second we were alone on the highway, and the next there was this blur of motion, black and silver and flesh-colored, slamming into the front of the car like a deer. Only it wasn't a deer. It was a person, a man on a motorcycle, coming the wrong way. Maybe he was drunk, maybe high, or maybe just angry and reckless and done with his life. Whatever it was, he crossed into our lane and hit us head on. His body went up. That's what I remember. It flew. Not a graceful arc like in the movies. Not some dramatic slow motion flip. It was ugly. Awkward. Bent in all the wrong ways, limbs stiff and then suddenly loose like something giving out mid-air. His helmet came off mid-flight. Or maybe it had never been on right in the first place. I don't know. I just remember it wasn't on his head when he hit the pavement. The bike flew too. It skidded and bounced, then veered off into the marsh, disappearing into a thick patch of cattails and standing water maybe 20 feet off the road. I didn't see it land. I didn't care about the bike. Nobody did. All eyes were on the man. The car stopped. My dad pulled over to the shoulder, maybe out of instinct, maybe out of panic. I don't know what people think or feel in those moments, because I wasn't them. I was just along for the ride, literally strapped to his chest, watching the world through small eyes that couldn't make sense of any of it. He and my uncle got out fast. The doors slammed open and they ran. My dad didn't even take me out of the harness. He just bolted toward the body with me, still strapped to him, my face bouncing against his chest with every step, getting closer and closer to the motionless figure sprawled in the road. I've never forgotten how the pavement looked that day. It was cracked and gray, with tiny pebbles baked into it by years of sun and heat. In between the cracks were little weeds and bits of tire rubber. And there, right in the middle of all that, was blood. A lot of it. Not movie blood. This wasn't bright red, not like paint. It was darker, thicker, almost brown in places, like oil leaking from a machine. It spread fast at first, then slowed to a trickle. I didn't know what it was back then, but I knew it wasn't right. The man was lying face down. His legs were twisted, one shoe off. His arms were under him, bent in ways they shouldn't have been. He wasn't moving, but he was still breathing. You could see in the way his back rose and fell, shallow and irregular. Not calm, not even panicked, just barely there, like he was losing the ability to do it at all. My dad crouched next to him. That put me right at the same level as the guy's head. I remember how close we were. So close I could see his ear. It was scratched and dirty, bits of gravel stuck to it. Then he moved, just his head at first. a slow roll, like something turning over in sleep. Then his face came into view. I didn't have the words for what I saw back then. I still struggle to describe it now. His face was gone. Not completely, but enough that it didn't look human anymore. The lower half had been torn away, ripped, crushed, something. The skin was gone from his chin and mouth, just raw red muscle and bone showing through. His teeth were exposed in a way that looked like a scream, but no sound came out. Then he looked at me. His eyes were open, bloodshot, unfocused, but open. And for just a second, they locked onto mine. Right into them. That was the moment. That's the moment that stuck. I don't remember what else was around me. What the sky looked like, what my dad was doing, whether there were birds or sirens or shouting. But I remember that stare. The way his eyes widened. How his face, what was left of it, twitched like he was trying to speak, trying to scream. But all that came out was this horrible, wet sound. A gurgle mixed with something like a hiss, low and choked. A rattle. That sound didn't last long. He made it once. Then he stopped. His chest didn't rise again. His eyes didn't blink. He went still in front of me, right there on the pavement, looking into my face as the last breath left his body. My dad pulled me back a bit, probably realizing that wasn't something a toddler should be that close to. But it was too late. It was already in me, branded behind my eyes, soaked into the part of my brain that was still forming. We waited for the police. Paramedics came. I don't remember much about them, just that they took the man away and asked questions. I don't think anyone blamed us. He had crossed into our lane. There were no charges, no lawsuits, just a story that faded away in the news, if it even made it that far. But I didn't forget. I couldn't. As I grew up, that memory stayed with me in strange ways. I didn't talk about it. I didn't even know how to bring it up. How do you explain to someone that the first real memory you have is watching a man die with half his face missing? It doesn't come up naturally in conversation. So I kept it quiet, tucked away. But it came back. Not every night, but enough. The dreams were strange. Not nightmares exactly. Not like the classic ones where you wake up screaming or thrashing. Mine were slower, heavier. I'd be in that same swampy stretch of highway, walking alone, or sometimes riding in a car that had no driver. The trees would blur past, the sky gray. And then I'd see him standing by the edge of the road, just watching. Not doing anything. Just there. No face. Just those eyes. Always those eyes. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't think he's haunting me, or that there's anything supernatural about it. I think it's just trauma. Something too big and too raw for a little brain to handle. So it buried itself deep and comes out in dreams when I'm tired or stressed or not thinking clearly. I've never been in a crash myself. Not since then. I'm careful on the road. Maybe overly careful. And I can't look at motorcycles without thinking of that day. The way the bike spun through the air, the way the man's body crumbled, the way his eyes locked onto mine. I don't tell people this story, usually, but I'm telling it now because I think it's time. Not for anyone else, just for me. Because I still think about it. It still visits me, and I think it always will. It's not a ghost story. It's not a dream. It happened. I was there. I saw him die. I saw his face, and that moment became the first clear memory of my life. Not my first step, not my first word, not a birthday party or a toy or a pet. A man, broken and bleeding, staring into my eyes as he died. That's what I have. That's what I carry. And I don't think it's ever going away. But maybe, just maybe, writing it down will keep it from getting worse. Maybe it'll stop the dreams, or at least give me some control over how they come. Maybe now I can finally sleep. When I was 16, I lived in a quiet house at the end of a cul-de-sac. It wasn't anything special. A 2-story place with beige vinyl siding, old carpeting, and a lot of creaking wood. My room was upstairs, and the walls were thin enough that I could hear the sound of the washing machine downstairs when it hit the spin cycle. My parents worked long hours, and my little sister spent most of her time in her room watching cartoons. That summer, I had a lot of time alone. I didn't really have any close friends then, and I wasn't very social. Most days, I stayed in my room with a book, or I'd lie on my bed and stare at the ceiling fan slowly turning in lazy circles overhead. That day started off like most others. I'd slept in a bit too long, skipped breakfast, and had spent most of the morning halfway between reading and napping. I remember the book I was reading was one I'd already read before, a paperback sci-fi novel with a torn cover and bent pages. I like that kind of thing, faraway planets, empty space, that feeling of weightlessness. I was about halfway through a chapter when I realized I was getting hungry. The kind of slow, dull hunger that sneaks up on you. My stomach wasn't growling, but there was an emptiness there. I thought about getting up, going downstairs to the kitchen, maybe making a sandwich. I even sat up and swung my legs over the side of the bed. But for some reason, I lay back down. I don't remember making that choice exactly. It wasn't like I consciously said, no, I'll just lie down again. It was more like something inside me nudged me back into the mattress. I didn't feel tired. I wasn't dizzy or sick. I just sank into the bed again and looked up at the ceiling. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the little clock on my nightstand and the distant hum of the fridge downstairs. As I lay there, something strange started to happen. It wasn't sudden. It didn't come all at once. It started with a feeling, one I couldn't name, like my body was becoming less important, like the edges of me were softening. I didn't feel heavy anymore. I felt light, not emotionally, not like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, but physically, tangibly. I could feel the sheets beneath me, but they didn't seem to press into my skin the way they usually did. It was almost like I wasn't lying on them at all, but hovering just above. Then I started to rise. It was slow, so slow that at first I thought maybe I was imagining it. But I could see the ceiling coming closer. Not fast, not jarring, but steady. I looked to the side and saw the edge of my bed drifting away beneath me. My arms were at my sides, my legs straight. I wasn't moving them, but they were lifting too. The entire room looked a little warped, like the air between me and everything else had thickened. And then I saw myself standing in the doorway. At first, I didn't realize it was me. It looked like someone I knew but couldn't quite place. A mirror image, but not in the sense of reflection. It was me, my posture, my haircut, the scar on my left eyebrow from when I fell off my bike as a kid. I was standing there with my arms hanging limp, just watching. My expression was blank, eyes locked on the me that was rising off the bed. The bed me, my body, the one that had stayed behind, was still lying there, eyes closed. I couldn't look away. I tried to turn, tried to move, but I couldn't feel any resistance, no tension in my muscles. I was floating, and I could feel that I was spinning now. Slowly. Not like twirling in water, but more like a slow tilt, turning clockwise from my right side. At first it was gentle. I barely noticed it, but by the time I was nearly sideways, I was aware of the shift. The body on the bed began to tilt into view. My face. My own face. Pale eyes shut, breathing steady. Then I saw my own eyes open. It happened all at once. 1 second they were closed, and then they weren't. Wide open, staring up, staring directly into the face of the floating me. I can't explain how wrong that moment felt. I don't mean in a horror movie kind of way, but in a deep, instinctual way. Like two magnets forced together at the wrong poles. It was like seeing something that wasn't supposed to exist. And through it all, the me in the doorway just stood there, watching. I don't know how long the moment lasted. Maybe a second, maybe less. But in that instant, I felt the eyes of all three of me, floating, lying, standing, locked together in some impossible triangle. The floating me wanted to scream, but there was no sound, no breath, no throat to shape it. Just that cold panic, buried deep inside whatever I was in that moment. The me on the bed didn't react. The eyes were open, yes, but the body was still, as if I were asleep with my eyes forced open. Then the floating me dropped. Not floated back down. Not drifted. Dropped. Like a puppet with its strings cut. I fell through the air, and I hit the bed hard. I felt the impact in every inch of my body. It wasn't like waking from a dream. It was like slamming back into reality. My vision blurred, my ears rang, and I felt my limbs spasm slightly. My heart was pounding. My mouth was dry. I couldn't move at first, couldn't even blink. I just lay there, staring up at the ceiling, gasping for breath that didn't seem to want to come. The room was silent. The light from the window was still slanting across the floor. The clock on the nightstand still ticked. Nothing had changed, but everything felt different. I didn't see the me in the doorway anymore. I sat up slowly, legs trembling as I let them drop off the side of the bed again. My palms were sweaty, and when I wiped them on the blanket, I realized my whole body felt like it had been dipped in ice water. I was freezing. My skin was clammy, and the hair on my arms stood on end. My shirt clung to my back. I stood up. My knees nearly buckled under me. I held onto the edge of my desk for a few seconds until the dizziness faded. I looked over at the doorway, empty, just the hallway beyond, with the slightly darker patch of carpet where the sun didn't reach. I walked to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at myself in the mirror for a long time. Everything looked normal, but I didn't feel normal. I felt like I'd been peeled apart and stitched back together. Like I'd seen too much of myself from the outside. For the rest of the day, I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't eat. I didn't even go downstairs. I sat at my desk with the book open, but I didn't read. I couldn't concentrate. I just stared at the page without seeing the words. My body felt like it was mine, but also not mine. Like I was wearing it instead of being it. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt that same lightness creeping in, that slow drift. I forced myself to stay awake. I sat upright against the wall, knees pulled to my chest, eyes wide open. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every passing car sent shadows crawling across the ceiling. I waited for the feeling to come back. It didn't. Not that night. But something changed in me after that day. I became hyper-aware of myself. My movements, my posture, my reflection. I avoided mirrors whenever I could. I didn't want to catch myself from the wrong angle, afraid I might see something I shouldn't. And the strange thing was, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been watched. Not just by the me in the doorway, but by something else, something deeper. Like a part of me had stepped outside the normal way people live, even if just for a moment, and had seen things we aren't meant to see. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? Even saying it out loud felt dangerous, like acknowledging it might make it happen again. So I kept it buried. I moved on, at least on the surface. Years passed. I graduated, moved out, got a job. I built a new routine, but I never fully forgot. The memory is still with me, vivid as the day it happened. I still have that same book. It sits on a shelf in my living room now. I haven't opened it since. Sometimes I wonder if that moment was a kind of seizure, a dissociative episode, something medical. I've looked it up, tried to find a diagnosis that fits. I've read about out-of-body experiences, lucid dreaming, sleep paralysis. Nothing matches exactly. There are similarities, sure, but the way it felt, the way the different versions of myself interacted, it wasn't like a dream. It wasn't like being paralyzed. It was like being separated, cut apart cleanly and precisely. And the way the me in the doorway stood there, still, silent, almost cold, it didn't feel like a dream version of myself. It felt like something more detached, more indifferent. Over time, I come to terms with it, mostly. I don't obsess over the way I used to. But every now and then, when I'm alone and the house is quiet, I feel a little too aware of myself. I'll be sitting at the kitchen table or lying in bed at night, and suddenly I'll get that sense again, that lightness, that distant feeling that I'm not quite inside my body the way I used to be. When that happens, I don't lie back down. I get up. I move around. I turn on lights. I do something that forces me to stay grounded. I remind myself that I'm here in this moment, in this body, because I never want to see myself standing in that doorway again. Not because it scared me, but because of how calm it felt, because of how natural it seemed, and how easily it happened. And because I'm not sure that, if it happened again, I'd come back. I didn't live this story, but one of my teachers told it to me back when I was still in school. It stuck with me ever since, not because it was terrifying in a haunted house or ghostly sort of way, but because it was the kind of fear that creeps up in the real world. The kind of fear that doesn't come from shadows or whispers, but from men, bad timing, and being in the wrong place when no one is around to help. He told it to me straight. No drama, no pauses for effect. Just one long story that he got through without blinking much. And he didn't smile until the very end. According to him, this happened years ago when he was still relatively young. He was down in Mexico, traveling between small towns. His wife, girlfriend at the time, was from a nearby village, and he was driving to see her from a different town a few miles away. These weren't towns you see on tourist maps. They weren't resort areas with polished sidewalks or restaurants with English menus. These were mountain towns, places that seemed stitched into the rocks themselves, with more dirt roads than paved ones, and a lot of buildings that looked like they hadn't changed in 50 years. He had rented an old car, the kind that rattled a little when it started and always smelled like oil, no matter how many windows you rolled down. He had been told to take the main road through the lowlands, but that road was long and winding, and it would have taken hours. Instead, someone mentioned a shortcut, a road that cut through the mountains, supposedly only taking half the time. He was warned about it, not just once. Several people in town, shop owners, a guy fixing a motorbike, even an old woman sitting on a step outside her home. They all told him the same thing. Don't take the mountain road at night. But he was in a hurry. He hadn't seen his wife in days, and something about the way people said it felt like old superstition. He figured they were warning him because the road was steep or maybe had some bad turns. Maybe there were no lights or guardrails. He didn't think they were lying. He just didn't think it applied to him. So he gassed up the car, grabbed a few things to snack on for the road, and decided to take the mountain road anyway. He told me it started out beautiful. The sun was still up when he left town, and for a while, everything looked like it came from postcard. The road twisted gently through hills that gradually turned into sharp inclines. The scenery was all green and gold, the trees thick and layered over each other like blankets. The mountains in the distance glowed in the fading sunlight, and the whole thing made him feel like maybe the locals had been overly cautious. The road wasn't great, narrow and cracked in places, but it didn't seem dangerous. At least not at first. It wasn't long before the sun disappeared behind the hills. The sky turned from a soft orange to a darker purple, and before he knew it, full night had set in. The headlights from his car stretched only a few feet ahead. The trees on either side of the road became black masses. The comforting beauty from earlier was gone, replaced by a thick, tense silence. There were no lights, no houses, not even signs. Just darkness and the sound of the tires crunching over loose gravel. He said he started to get uneasy about 20 minutes into the climb. It wasn't anything specific at first, just that feeling you get when you're isolated and too far from help if something were to go wrong. He checked his gas, which was fine, and tried turning on the radio, but it only gave static. The road started getting narrower, the incline steeper, and now every turn felt like it could be the one that sent the car tumbling down the side of the mountain if he wasn't careful. He slowed to a crawl, eyes scanning the road as far as the weak beams would allow. Then he saw it. At first, it just looked like a dark shape ahead. But as he got closer, he realized it was a tree trunk, a huge one, lying completely across the road. Thick, splintered, and clearly placed there because there was no sign of a storm or fallen branches anywhere else. The trunk was cleanly cut on one end and splintered on the other, as if it had been dragged there deliberately. It didn't fall. It was put there. He hit the brakes and sat still for a few seconds. The car idled roughly, its engine humming just loud enough to feel like it was pulling attention from somewhere. The hair on the back of his neck started standing up, and before he could even think of what to do next, maybe reverse, maybe try to turn around, he saw movement out of the corner of his eye. From the trees, several figures emerged. At least 4 or 5, but it was hard to tell in the dark. They moved quickly and without hesitation, like this wasn't the first time they'd done something like this. They rushed the car, and before he could even throw it in reverse, they were yanking the door open. One of them grabbed him by the shirt, and just like that, he was pulled out of the car and onto the ground. He told me it happened fast. No shouting, no threats. They took his wallet, yanked off his watch, and started beating him. Kicks, fists, the occasional stomp. It wasn't wild or angry. It was practiced, calculated. They knew exactly how to hurt someone without immediately killing them. He tried to protect his face, curled up instinctively, his mind racing in 1,000 directions at once. He didn't know if they were going to leave him there or finish him off. He said at some point, while gasping and coughing and bleeding from the lip, he said something, a joke, or at least something he intended to be one. He couldn't remember exactly what it was anymore, but it had something to do with how ridiculous the situation was. Something about getting mugged in the middle of nowhere and missing his date. For a split second, there was silence. Then one of them laughed. Not a polite laugh either, a real one. Then another joined in. Soon, all of them were laughing. The beating stopped. He lay there, dazed and in pain, unsure if they were laughing at him or with him. But instead of kicking him again, one of them helped him up. He stood on shaky legs, his shirt torn, wallet gone, and ribs aching. They didn't say anything. They just nudged him in a certain direction and started walking. Confused, he followed. They led him down a side trail off the road, a path he hadn't seen from the car. It went down a bit through thicker trees and then opened into a kind of clearing where a small shack stood. It was rough and dirty, but it had lights and there was music playing inside, a scratchy radio station playing ranchera songs. Inside, there were more men. Not many, just a couple drinking and smoking. They handed him a beer. He didn't know what else to do, so he drank it. Then another. Then another. He said the hours after that were a blur. They drank with him, played music, passed around food. They laughed more, not at him, but with him. They started treating him like some kind of strange guest, as if the beating had just been a rough introduction. He didn't get his wallet back, of course. He ended up spending whatever cash he had left on drinks and food they kept ordering or pulling out of coolers. It was surreal, like the violence had been some kind of filter he had to pass through to reach this strange, drunken acceptance. By early morning, the alcohol had dulled the pain, but his body still ached. His face was bruised, and he was still wearing torn clothes. But he was alive. One of the men walked him back up to the road, past the same spot where the tree had been. It was gone now, dragged off to the side like it had never been there. His car was still parked, untouched except for the missing valuables. He got in and drove away, slowly, carefully, down the other side of the mountain. When he reached the next town and finally found his wife, she gasped when she saw him. He didn't tell her the full story until much later. For a while, he just said he was mugged. But over time, he told the full thing. And then he told us, years later. He said the fear wasn't in the pain or the danger. It was in the realization that you can be out there, on your own, and things can happen that make no sense. He wasn't targeted. They didn't know him. They just saw an opportunity and took it. But somehow his instinct to say something funny, something dumb in the middle of a beating had pulled him out of it. He said he never took that road again. Not once. Not even during the day. I remember sitting in that classroom, the fluorescent lights humming above, and thinking about how easy it is to assume that things will be fine, just because they usually are. But the world doesn't care about how things usually go. It only takes one bad turn, one ignored warning, one road too empty. He told us all that humor might have saved his life. But it wasn't luck. It was just timing. Bad timing that somehow spun itself into good. And that was the scariest part of the whole story. Not the beating, not the robbery, but the fact that he didn't really do anything special to survive. He just happened to say the right thing at the right time. And if he hadn't, maybe none of us would have heard the story at all. That's what stuck with me. The randomness of it all. The way real fear doesn't always wear a costume. Sometimes it just wears a smile, hands you a beer, and laughs like nothing ever happened. And you drive away with bruises, an empty wallet, and a story you'll never quite be able to explain. It happened a few summers ago, when I was around 15. It was one of those long, drawn-out summers where every day blurred into the next. The kind of summer where time didn't really exist because no one had to wake up for school, and we didn't care about anything except passing the time with cheap thrills and each other. I was spending almost every day at my best friend's apartment. Her mom worked long shifts and often spent nights away with her boyfriend, so the place was more or less ours. It was small, kind of run down, but it was ours. We could drink, smoke, and talk about nothing for hours, just lounging on that old porch surrounded by chipped white railing and the faint smell of mildew. We'd been getting high and drunk most of the day, just a few of us girls. It was stupid, sure, but it felt normal back then. Nobody thought twice about the mix of alcohol and weed. We laughed until our sides hurt, legs draped over plastic chairs, our cups sloshing and ashtrays filling up. The heat made everything feel slow. Our bodies stuck to the furniture, and the air smelled like grass and sweat and smoke. I had hit my limit somewhere around midnight. My stomach had started turning a bit, and my eyelids felt like weights. I knew I had to lie down. I didn't even say much. I just walked into her room and flopped down on the old beige couch that sat across from the window. It was one of those half-pulled-out couch beds, but nobody ever actually opened it up. It sagged in the middle and smelled a little bit like dog, but I didn't care. I'd slept on it more times than I could count. I knew where to throw my leg to keep the springs from digging into my side. I passed out fast. I was in that heavy, dreamless kind of sleep when the girls came into the room. I barely opened my eyes when I heard them whispering and rustling around. One of them shook me lightly, letting me know they were sneaking out. It wasn't a big deal. Her window was on the first floor and didn't have a screen, so it was basically like a door to the outside world. We came and went through it constantly. I nodded and mumbled something, half asleep, and when they slid out one by one, I remember forcing myself to get up for a second and walk over to pull the window shut. It didn't latch or anything, but closing it felt like a habit, something that gave me a small sense of safety. I crawled back to the couch and dropped like a stone. I think maybe 5 or 10 minutes passed before I heard the soft thud of someone landing outside. It wasn't a big sound, just a faint rustle of dry grass and the soft brush of something against the wall. I didn't think much of it. I figured one of the girls had come back for a lighter or her phone or something. It wasn't uncommon for them to forget things and come crawling back through the window. I heard it again, a whisper sound, a shift in the stillness. Then the window creaked. Not loudly, just enough. Enough to feel wrong. I didn't get up right away. My brain wasn't fully awake, and I was still somewhere in the haze between sleep and reality. But I opened my eyes, and something about the air in the room felt off. Heavier. Stiller. Then I heard again, but this time it wasn't outside. It was inside, right next to my head. I didn't sit up all the way. Just lifted my head slightly, groggy and confused, squinting through the darkness. My glasses were off, and my eyesight is terrible without them, so everything looked blurry. The streetlight outside cast a dull orange glow into the room, just enough for me to make out shapes. That's when I saw the face. He was right there, just inches from me. I froze. We stared at each other. He didn't move. I didn't breathe. His face was partially covered, a dark beanie pulled low over his forehead and a scarf covering his mouth and nose. Only his eyes were visible, wide and dark, and just as startled as mine. But his arms were already inside, his body halfway through the open window. He had been reaching around on the floor, feeling for something, maybe a phone, maybe a bag. I'll never know. The seconds stretched out, each one feeling like a lifetime. My heart kicked into overdrive. My body screamed at me to do something, anything, but I couldn't move. I just stared, paralyzed. Then I screamed. It wasn't a graceful scream. It was raw and jagged, pulled straight from my gut. My whole body convulsed with it. He flinched and jerked backward, scrambling to pull himself out of the window. I thought he was going to run. For a moment, I thought it was over. But then he hesitated. He paused. His hand went to his belt. I screamed again, louder this time, frantic. My voice cracked and caught in my throat. I tried to roll off the couch to hide or run, but I couldn't seem to make my limbs move right. My legs tangled in the blanket. I felt like I was underwater. He pointed something at me. I thought it was a gun. I thought I was going to die right there, on that awful old couch with the sunburned upholstery and the sagging middle. I couldn't see clearly without my glasses, and the object in his hand was just a black shape, but it was pointed at my face. Then came the burning. Not a gunshot. No loud bang. Just a sudden, horrible stinging across my face, my eyes, my mouth. I screamed again, but this time it came out garbled and desperate. My face was on fire. My eyes slammed shut on instinct, and my hands flew up, but it was too late. The burning spread like wildfire, burrowing into every open pore. It was Mace. He had maced me, right in the face, point blank. I rolled onto the floor, gasping. My vision was completely gone now, tears streaming down my cheeks, pain pulsing through my sinuses and mouth. I couldn't breathe properly. The chemicals had sunk into my throat. My skin felt like it was peeling off. I curled into a ball on the floor and sobbed, unable to form thoughts, just pain and panic, pain and panic. At some point, he left. I never heard him go. I never saw him run. He was just gone. I couldn't move. My legs were shaking too badly. I fumbled around blindly on the floor until I found my phone and called my friend. I must have called her 3 times, maybe more. I was bawling, begging them to come back. My voice sounded foreign to me. I was choking and coughing, and snot was running down my face, but it all blended into the stinging mess. She answered. She said they were coming. I laid there on the floor, curled into myself, crying so hard it hurt. It felt like I was going blind. The pain was deep and pulsing, and I couldn't stop scratching at my face even though it made everything worse. When they came back, they freaked out. They grabbed a washcloth and soaked it in milk. Someone had heard it helped with mace. They pressed it gently to my face, and I cried even more from the pain of relief. The milk dulled the burn slightly, but my eyes were swollen and leaking, and my skin felt raw. We called the police. They came, asked questions, took photos of everything. My face, the window, the floor. They brought a flashlight and poked around outside. They wrote some stuff down and asked me the same questions over and over. I told them what I saw, what I felt, what happened. Every word felt like pulling teeth. They looked at each other a lot. Eventually, they said they didn't find any evidence of forced entry. No footprints, no fingerprints, no signs that someone had actually been there. They said it was probably a bad dream, a delusion. Maybe I'd gotten too high, too drunk, and my brain had made it all up. But my face was still burning. They took pictures of that too, but left with a shrug and a nod and some vague promise to follow up. They never did. Everyone else believed me. My friends, her mom, when she got back. They knew I hadn't made it up. I hadn't sprayed myself with mace. I couldn't have hallucinated that kind of pain. I couldn't sleep after that. For weeks, maybe months. I kept seeing his eyes every time I closed mine. I stopped sleeping on couches. Stopped sleeping near windows, period. Even now, years later, I feel it sometimes. That feeling of air shifting, of eyes watching, of silence that suddenly feels too loud. I still check every window before I sleep. I still bolt them, even if they're on the second floor. I don't trust screens. I don't trust the dark. I never found out who he was, what he wanted, why he was there. He didn't take anything, didn't say anything. He just climbed halfway into that window and then disappeared into the night. But he was real. I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And no matter how many people tried to dismiss it or explain it away, I still carry the memory like a scar under my skin. It changed something in me. Woke me up in a way I didn't want to be woken. I think sometimes we go through life assuming that we're safe because nothing bad has happened yet. But one night, just one, can take that away. And for me, it did. When I was 23, I lived in a small town in Pennsylvania, not far from where I'd grown up. It wasn't exactly rural, but it wasn't suburban either. It was one of those in-between places where things weren't close enough to walk, but there were still old trails and forest patches separating neighborhoods and parks. People who lived there long enough got used to cutting through wooded areas instead of sticking to sidewalks or streets. I did it all the time. It was just easier. There was a particular trail I used often. It cut through a wooded patch between 2 parks, maybe a 10-minute walk total, with a little footpath that was mostly dirt and gravel. I've been using that path since high school. It wasn't exactly maintained, but it was well worn, and people clearly still used it. This happened in late July. I remember because it was the summer after my college graduation, and I had moved back home to save money while looking for work. I had just started taking long walks in the evenings to clear my head. That night, it was close to 8 o'clock when I left the first park and started heading through the woods. Sunset was around 8:30, and I figured I had enough time to make it through before it got too dark. The heat from the day had started to lift, but the air was still humid. I was sweating lightly under my t-shirt, and gnats hovered close to my skin no matter how often I waved them away. The woods weren't thick, not like a national park or anything. You could see the sky through the canopy in most places, and the underbrush wasn't heavy. There were a few old trees, oaks and pines mostly, but also a lot of younger ones with narrow trunks. You could tell where the trail was by the packed dirt and crushed leaves. A few people had even dragged fallen branches off to the side over the years to keep it open. I'd been through there dozens of times, and nothing ever felt strange about it. It was just a shortcut, one I'd taken with friends and alone more times than I could count. That night felt normal at first. The woods were alive with the sounds you'd expect. Crickets, cicadas, birds calling out as they settled in for the night. I remember it was one of those evenings where the sound of insects was almost like static, a thick hum that coated the background. My sneakers crunched against the gravel and twigs, and I could hear my breathing, just a soft rhythm as I moved. Nothing out of place. I walked quickly, but not hurriedly. I wasn't scared. I was just trying to beat the darkness. It wasn't until maybe halfway through that I noticed something had changed. I don't know exactly when it happened, because it was so gradual. But suddenly, I could hear my own footsteps very clearly. Too clearly. It was like someone had turned down the background noise. The crickets had stopped. No rustling leaves, no birds. Just me and the trail. At first, I didn't register it. I kept walking. It was only when I noticed how loud the gravel was under my feet, how sharp the sound of my breathing was in my ears, that I realized the forest had gone totally still. It creeped me out. Not panic, not even fear, just that weird, tight feeling you get in your gut when something isn't right. I kept walking. I didn't stop, didn't look around, just moved faster. It was one of those situations where your body sort of decides before your brain does. You're unsettled, so you move. I remember thinking maybe a predator was nearby. A fox or even a coyote. That can make other animals go quiet. But even that didn't feel right. I've walked through woods before with deer nearby, even with foxes out at dusk, and I've never heard this kind of silence. It felt thick, like it was pressing against my ears. Then I heard it, a laugh. It was faint, just a soft, muffled sound. Quick, almost like someone laughing into their sleeve. I stopped. My heart jumped, and I just stood there listening. Nothing followed. I stared down the path, then behind me. The woods were dim now, shadows stretching between the trunks. I told myself it was someone in the park. Maybe someone walking through the other end. A teenager, a jogger, someone on their phone. Laughter travels weird in the woods. I shrugged it off and kept moving. I picked up the pace. About 30 seconds later, I heard it again. Same laugh, still muffled, but a little clearer. Short burst, maybe a second and a half long. Just long enough to hear the shape of it. I didn't stop that time. I just kept walking, faster now. My skin had gone cold even though the air was warm, and I was starting to feel the panic push in. I kept my eyes forward, but my ears were straining in every direction. No footsteps, no voices, no bugs, just the breeze moving through the trees and the crunch of my feet on the dirt. Then it happened, the moment that still makes my hands shake to think about. This loud, sharp, ridiculous laugh cut through the silence. Like a cartoon character, but twisted. High-pitched, cracked in the middle, bouncing up and down in pitch. I don't even know how else to describe it except to say it sounded like a demented Woody Woodpecker laugh. Like someone doing an exaggerated version of that kind of cartoon cackle, but with something completely off about it. Human, but wrong. I turned to look, half turning really as I was starting to run, and I saw it. A garbage can. One of those old metal ones with the circular lid. It was flying through the air, not rolling or tumbling. Asterisk flying. Asterisk it came up over a tree, a tall one, maybe 20 feet high, like someone had launched it with a catapult. It wasn't wobbling either. It was rotating end over end like it had been thrown hard. It crashed down onto the path a few feet behind me, landing on its side and bouncing once before settling in the grass. I screamed. I mean it, I didn't shout or yelp or gasp. I screamed the way people do in movies when they're out of control of their body. Full, raw, terrified sound. And then I ran. I ran like my life depended on it. My legs moved without thinking. I was gasping, almost hyperventilating, but I didn't stop. That laugh, asterisk that laugh, asterisk, was still ringing in my head, and I couldn't even process how the hell a garbage can flew that high or where it even came from. There were no houses nearby, not close enough for someone to throw it. No trash pickup stations. Nothing. As I pounded down the trail, gravel slipping under my shoes, I heard something ahead of me. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't wind. It was movement. Fast. Heavy. Leaves and underbrush being disturbed up the path. Whatever it was in front of me now. I slowed for a half second, confused. Something was running away ahead of me. I wasn't being chased. I was chasing it, unknowingly. But I couldn't stop. I didn't know what else to do. The path curved ahead, and I followed it at full speed, pumping my arms, lungs burning. Then I heard it, the splash. A massive, gut-deep splash, like a person doing a cannonball into a swimming pool, only heavier, thicker. And when I rounded the bend in the trail, I saw the pond. It sat off the trail to the right, maybe 20 yards across. Murky, still, the surface covered with green slime and algae like so many ponds in town were. But now, at the far end, a huge slash of water was raining back down. Just the tail end of a massive entry. The ripples were wide and slow, spreading outward from a point that looked freshly broken through the scum-covered surface. I could see a dark hole in the algae where something had gone in. Nothing came up. I ran. I didn't stop to look for anything else. I followed the path around the pond, not even daring to glance toward the water. My entire body was vibrating. I was crying without realizing it, tears stinging the sides of my face from the speed and panic. I just ran. I don't remember the rest of the trail. It blurred. I came out the other side near the second park, collapsed onto a bench, and sat there for maybe 20 minutes. My legs were shaking too hard to walk. I kept staring at the tree lean, waiting to see if something would come out. Nothing did. I went home eventually, but I didn't sleep that night. I just lay on my bed, every light on, replaying the sounds, the splash. I checked online the next day. Local police reports, missing persons, animal sightings, anything. Nothing. Just a quiet Thursday in a quiet town. I never went back through that trail again. I still don't know what I saw. I've told exactly one other person in detail before writing this. Not because I think it was supernatural. I don't. But because it's too weird to explain. People jump to conclusions. They say ghosts, Bigfoot, demons. I don't buy any of that. I think it was a person, a real, living person. Someone who was strong enough to throw garbage can over a 20-foot tree. Someone who made a laugh like that on purpose. Someone who ran from me, fast, and dove into a pond and never came back up. But why? What was the point? The can. That's the part that sticks with me the most. It wasn't there when I started walking. I would have seen it. Someone brought it in, hauled it through the woods, waited, hid. For what? Just to mess with me? To get a reaction? It worked. I dream about it sometimes. I'll be back on that path, the trail stretching ahead of me. I'll hear the laugh again, or the splash. Sometimes I'm standing still and can't move, just watching the water ripple and ripple. Other times I see the can flying overhead again, but it never lands. It just spins forever over the trees. I don't think it was a ghost. I don't think it was an animal. I think it was a person. But the worst part is that I have no idea what kind of person. I've always been scared of ghosts and demons, even if I've spent most of my life pretending they don't exist. I used to tell myself it was all made-up stuff, things people talked about to scare kids or make sense of things they couldn't explain. But deep down, I never felt fully convinced. I think it's because of the way I grew up, especially because of my grandmother. She was a strange woman, a heavy drinker, but deeply religious. Her Bible was always open, even when she wasn't sober enough to read it. Sometimes I find her swaying back and forth on the edge of her bed, mumbling verses with a glass of cheap gin in her hand. Her beliefs weren't comforting, though. They made everything worse. She used to say there were demons in the corners of the house, behind the doors, near the windows. She told me they watched me while I slept. When I was little, maybe around 4 or 5, I remember waking up with my forehead feeling sticky. She had crept into my room in the middle of the night and drawn a cross on my head with some kind of oil. I didn't even know she was in the room until I felt her thumb press into my skin. That kind of stuff happened a lot. Sometimes I'd wake up and see her standing there just watching me, eyes glossy and dark, whispering to herself like she was trying to keep something away. I didn't like it, but I didn't know how to say anything back then. I didn't know what was normal and what wasn't. She said she could see things around us, things we couldn't see, that I needed protecting. I never saw anything myself, but her fear got into me. It stayed there like a seed and grew into this heavy thing I've carried ever since. But the first time something truly messed with me happened after my great-grandmother died. I didn't know her all that well. I mean, I'd seen her a few times, but she was already really old and sick by then. She always smelled like rose lotion and Vicks, and she had this tiny voice, like she was always half asleep. She passed away one week in the middle of summer, right around when I was 6 or maybe 7. The funeral was simple. I don't remember a whole lot about it, just that I wore a stiff shirt and it was hot. The grown-ups cried and hugged and talked a lot. I sat on a church pew and picked a spot on my shoe for most of it. After the funeral, we went to her house. I guess my mom had planned to help clean it out, pack things up, sort through the old furniture and clothes. She brought me with her, probably because she didn't have anyone else to leave me with. I remember pulling up to that house and just staring at it for a while. It was small and squat, with fading white paint and an overgrown lawn. The front screen door didn't quite close all the way. It had this sharp squeak whenever it opened or shut, the kind that grated in your ears for a second too long. Inside, it smelled like mothballs and old wood. The air was heavy and still, like no one had walked through it in years, though I knew that wasn't true. My mom said some other relatives might stop by to help, so I wandered around while she started going through kitchen drawers and hall closets. I didn't have anything to do, and I didn't really want to touch anything. The furniture was all thick and dark, the kind that creaks when you even breathe near it. Doilies were draped over nearly everything. Old glass knickknacks lined the shelves like fragile little ghosts waiting to be knocked over. At some point, I walked into my great-grandmother's bedroom. I remember the bed first. It was one of those massive wooden ones with a high headboard covered in a pale quilt that looked like it hadn't been washed in years. It still held the shape of her body, or at least that's how it seemed to me. The room had a single window with those thick curtains that barely let any light in, so it was dim and quiet. Still, like even the dust was holding its breath. That's when I saw her, the little girl. She was standing near the edge of the bed, in a yellow dress with pink flowers on it. Her hair was dark and shoulder length. She looked about my age. I thought she was one of my cousins. I didn't recognize her exactly, but I was a shy kid, and there were always cousins I didn't really know at family events. I figured someone had dropped her off, and she came to play while the adults cleaned. She asked if I wanted to play hide and seek. I nodded. I wasn't good at it, but I was bored and nervous, and it was something to do. She said she would count and put her head down on the bed like she meant it. I remember watching her start to count while I turned around and tried to find a place to hide. There weren't many good options in the room. The bed was too low to crawl under. There was a dresser and an old vanity, but nothing that made sense for hiding. The only place that seemed to work was the closet at the foot of the bed. It was one of those shallow closets with sliding doors, but instead of sliding, these doors opened outward on small hinges. I stepped inside, crouched in the corner behind some coats and a broom, and pulled the door shut behind me. It clicked gently, and I sat there in the dark, knees pulled up, waiting to hear her footsteps. But nothing happened. A minute passed, then another. I started wondering if maybe she couldn't find me. I smiled to myself a little. Maybe I was finally doing a good job at hiding. I waited some more. Still nothing. I lost track of time in the dark. I remember touching the rough inside of the closet door, counting little ridges in the wood, listening for footsteps that never came. Eventually, I got bored. I figured she gave up and went back to the others. I pushed at the door. Nothing happened. I tried again, harder this time. The door didn't budge. It didn't have a lock on either side. Not the twist kind or the push-button kind. Just a plain knob. It didn't even make sense. I rattled it a little, but it stayed stuck. I pressed my body against it, tried to shove it open, and still nothing. That's when I started to panic. I don't mean a little nervous. I mean full panic, the kind where your chest starts to burn and your ears fill with rushing blood. I screamed. I pounded my fist against the door, kicked it, clawed at the knob until my hands hurt. Nothing. I screamed louder, hoping someone would hear. My voice broke and my eyes stung. I felt like the air was running out, like the walls were closing in. I remember gasping so hard that the edges of my vision went dark, like I was going to faint. The coats smelled like mold and old perfume, and every time I breathed in, it felt like I was choking on dust. Then Just as sudden as it got stuck, the doorknob turned. It didn't jiggle or rattle or creak. It just turned smoothly, and the door opened outward. There was no one there. The bedroom door was shut too. I remember freezing, blinking at the light, chest heaving, mouth dry. Then I bolted. I ran through the room, yanked the door open, and flew down the hallway. My legs barely worked right. I slipped on the plastic hallway runner, and my bladder gave out. I peed myself right there, leaving a trail behind me like some wounded animal. I didn't care. I just needed to get out. My mom was outside in the front yard, talking to one of the neighbors. She turned and saw me and started yelling, mostly about the mess I'd made, not understanding what had happened. She was mad, but I couldn't even talk. I was still crying. I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Later, she told me that no one else had come by the house. Everyone had gone to another relative's place for food after the funeral. She thought I had imagined the whole thing, but I didn't. I don't know who that girl was, or how the closet locked, or who opened the door. And the more I think about it, the more I realize how many things didn't make sense. The closet shouldn't have locked. There was no way for it to stay shut like that. And the girl, she didn't even say her name. I never saw her again, not at any family event, not in any old pictures. Still, I don't think it was anything supernatural. As much as my childhood fears want to twist the memory into something like that, I know better now. I think about it more logically. Maybe the closet door swelled from humidity. Maybe it got jammed. That old house was full of weird doors and sticky hinges. It could have been something mechanical. And the girl, maybe she was a neighbor kid who wandered over. Maybe she heard people were coming by and snuck into play. That happens, especially in quiet neighborhoods with open yards and curious kids. Or maybe I made some of it up. Not on purpose, but the way kids do when they're scared. I've read a lot about how young minds fill in blanks when they're overwhelmed. Maybe I imagined her face or remembered someone else and placed her in that room. Memory is messy, especially when it's mixed with fear. That whole day was emotionally charged. Everyone was grieving. I was left to wander alone in a strange house full of old things and shadows. My brain could have created something just to make sense of the silence. Whatever the truth is, I know what I felt in that closet. I know the kind of fear that wraps around your lungs and makes it hard to breathe. And I know that no matter how much I try to reason through it, some part of me is still stuck in that dark space, waiting to be let out. I've never played hide and seek since. I don't let closets close behind me. And even now, as an adult, I double-check every door before I walk into a room. Not because I believe in ghosts or demons, but because I know how easy it is to feel completely alone and trapped, even in a house full of people. And that's the part that really sticks with me. Not the mystery of the girl, or the door, or the timing. It's the fact that I screamed my lungs out and no one heard me. My mom was just outside, maybe 30 feet away. But in that moment, in that house, it was like I didn't exist. I think about that a lot. How quickly you can disappear in your own world, even while people are nearby. How easy it is to be locked in and forgotten. And that's scarier than anything my grandmother ever warned me about. A few years ago, something happened to me that I still can't fully wrap my head around. It feels like something I watched in a movie or something that happened to someone else. I've told the story a few times, and I always feel strangely disconnected from it, like I'm just repeating facts that don't belong to me. But it did happen. Every minute of it was real. I lived it. And to this day, even though nothing ever came of it, no arrests, no closure, I've never been the same. At the time, I was living in a mid-size apartment complex in a decent neighborhood. Nothing special, but not run down either. It was one of those two-story buildings where every unit has its own little balcony or patio. I lived on the second floor with my roommate. We weren't romantically involved. He was more like an overprotective brother type. A Texan, broad-shouldered, always caring, always alert. We got along fine, had our routines, respected each other's space. I had a cat then too. He wasn't your typical indoor pet. He liked going out onto the balcony and watching the birds or just sunbathing. I kept his litter box out there because he preferred it and it helped keep the smell out of the apartment. To let him come and go, we'd usually leave the sliding door open just enough so he could push it with his paw. It wasn't ideal, but we lived on the second floor, so I didn't think much of it. It always felt safe enough. That all changed when the apartment complex announced they'd be doing exterior painting. They left a paper notice on the door. Said they'd start power washing soon, followed by painting. Everyone with a balcony needed to move anything valuable or weather sensitive inside. I did as asked and brought my things in, including the cat's box, but I completely forgot about the slider. I was in a rush that morning. I didn't even see the crew out there yet when I left. That crew was a rough-looking bunch. Out-of-town hires, apparently. Not local guys, not anyone the complex had used before. I passed by them a few times coming and going, and they'd stare. Not just glance, but stare long and slow. A couple of them had catcalled me. Nothing too aggressive, but enough to make me uncomfortable. You know that instinct you get when someone's eyes are on you a second too long? That skin-prickling awareness? That happened every time I walked past them. I started planning my schedule around them, trying to avoid coming home when I thought they might still be working. The first incident happened the day they were on our balcony. I came home from work, walked in like normal, and immediately froze. The first thing I saw, front and center, was our fish tank. It was right by the entrance, up against the inside wall beside the kitchen. On top of it, deliberately propped up like a weird centerpiece, was a very personal item of mine. I'm not going to name it, but it belonged in a drawer in my bedroom. A drawer I never left open. A drawer I never discussed with anyone, not even my roommate. It was just sitting there, perfectly balanced, as if someone wanted to make sure it was the first thing I'd notice. My heart started racing. I walked straight to my room, pulled open the drawer, and sure enough, it had been opened. Not rifled through, not trashed. Just accessed. Neatly. Nothing else was taken. I kept some emergency cash in there, along with a small stash of weed. Both were untouched. That's what made it feel even more wrong. If someone broke into steal, why leave the money and weed? Why just move this one very specific item and display it? At first, I thought maybe my roommate was messing with me in some incredibly misguided, wildly inappropriate attempt at humor. But that didn't make sense either. He'd never done anything even remotely like that before. He was too respectful. When I asked him about it later, he was just as freaked out as I was. He swore up and down he hadn't touched anything, and I believed him. I had to. There was no other explanation that made sense, except the one I didn't want to admit. I put the item back where it belonged and tried to tell myself it was a mistake. Maybe I'd forgotten I left it out. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe I was imagining it. The next day, ripped those maybes to pieces. When I came home from work, there was something new outside my front door. Not trash, not a package, a setup, a display. A small two-tiered wooden end table had been placed directly beside the door. Old, scuffed wood, like something picked up at a thrift store or left out on a curb. On the top shelf sat a small statue of what looked like a fertility god. Rounded belly, stylized face. Surrounding it were crystals, burned-out candles, still warm incense sticks, and a live potted plant. Everything was arranged with intention. Balanced. Symmetrical. Like an offering. I stood there, staring at it for what felt like 10 full minutes. Then I started knocking on neighbors' doors one by one, asking if anyone saw who put it there, or if they'd done it as a prank. Every single person said no. A few hadn't even noticed it. A couple of them looked concerned. One elderly woman asked if she should call someone. I said I would handle it. I called everyone I could think of who might pull something like this. Friends, acquaintances, even an old boyfriend. No one confessed. In fact, they all seemed genuinely disturbed. A couple of them told me I needed to call the cops immediately, and that if it were them, they'd already be halfway to a hotel. I didn't want to leave just yet. My roommate wasn't home, and I didn't want to abandon my cat. But I didn't want to be alone either. So I waited in my car with the doors locked until my roommate got back. We went inside together and checked the apartment. Nothing looked immediately out of place. But then I noticed something that sent a chill straight through me. On the windowsill in the living room, there were two small picture frames. One of me and my son. One of me and my best friend. The frames were still there, but the photos had been removed. Just clean, empty mats staring back at me. My stomach flipped. I went straight to my bedroom, and there it was again. That same personal item. No longer on the fish tank. This time, it was laid out right on my bed, centered on the blanket like someone had placed it there lovingly, like a gift or a trophy. Everything else in the room was untouched. Nothing broken, nothing stolen. The windows were locked. The door showed no signs of forced entry. It was like someone had walked right in through the front and made themselves at home. I called the police. When the officer arrived, he took one look at the table outside and told me, very calmly but very firmly, that I needed to consider moving. He said this was the kind of thing that usually escalates. That whoever did this wasn't just messing with me. They had a fixation. They were watching, and they were trying to get into my head. He took fingerprints, took some notes, but he couldn't give me any promises. There was no sign of forced entry, no witnesses, no direct threats. Just implications, just enough to keep me on edge. My roommate didn't argue. We both knew this wasn't something we could ignore or rationalize anymore. That night, I barely slept. I left the lights on and sat up in bed, watching the door like a hawk. The next day, the shrine was gone. Sometime after the officer left, but before we could get around to taking it down ourselves, someone came and cleared it away. No trace left behind, not even wax drips. That felt even worse than the shrine itself. It meant someone was still watching. Someone who knew we had called the cops. Someone who was trying to stay ahead of us. But just when I thought it was over, the shrine came back. The day after it disappeared, we came home from work, and there it was again, set up exactly as before. Same statue, same crystals, same candles, this time newly used. The incense had burned down to ash. My roommate tore it down immediately. He didn't want me to see it again. We packed as fast as we could. Moving day came like a breath I'd been holding for too long. I tried not to think too hard about what had happened. Just wanted to get out, to breathe somewhere that didn't carry that electric buzz of being watched. Then, as I was taking apart my bed, lifting the mattress, I found something that made my legs nearly buckle. Between the mattress and the box spring was an old film camera. Not digital, the kind that uses rolls of 35 millimeters. It wasn't mine. It wasn't my roommate's. I hadn't seen it before in my life. Alongside it were two more empty picture frames, the backs removed, the glass intact. And tucked under one of them was a photo collage. One I had made years ago, me and my best friend, a mix of silly and serious snapshots from nights out. But someone had gone through it carefully. They had removed the more revealing photos. The ones we were dressed up for a party, laughing, showing more skin. Those were gone. I didn't even have it in me to cry. I called the police again, showed them everything. The camera, the photos, the hiding place. I told them I didn't want to know what was on that film unless it was absolutely necessary for me to know. They took it all in, bagged it, logged it, promised they'd follow up. They never did. Maybe they couldn't develop the film. Maybe there was nothing on it. Maybe there was something awful and they decided not to traumatize me further. I don't know. All I know is nothing ever came of it. No arrests, no leads. The apartment complex said the painting crew was a subcontracted team and they couldn't even confirm names. By the time I moved out, they were gone. I moved in with family for a while after that. Needed the support. The comfort of hearing someone else walking around the house at night. My roommate never had another incident. Nothing strange ever happened again. Just like that, it was over. But it changed me. I triple-checked. My mom lives in a quiet neighborhood out in the suburbs. One of those well-maintained places where the houses are all slightly different shades of beige. The driveways are edged clean, and the sidewalks are always swept clear of leaves. It's the kind of neighborhood that looks still and calm, even when it's full of people. Retired folks walk their dogs in the morning, delivery trucks come and go all afternoon, and families pull into their garages just after sunset. Everything is on schedule. Everything has a pattern. There's comfort in that. When I visit my mom, which isn't all that often anymore, I park in the same spot in front of her house and usually sit in the car for a moment, listening to whatever podcast I've got going before I grab my bag and head inside. Across the street lives a couple I never really got to know, but I recognized them and waved when I saw them outside. They have a son, a 12-year-old boy with autism, I think. Tall and lanky for his age. I never spoke to him, but I'd see him often, especially in the warmer months, out in the front yard, running in small loops or bouncing a ball between his palms. He was never alone. There was always a caregiver with him. A young woman most days, sometimes a tall man in scrubs. Always watching, always alert. The boy didn't say much. Actually, I'm not sure I ever heard him make a sound. But he seemed calm in his own way, lost in whatever world he drifted through in his mind. I didn't think much of it. About a year ago, in early fall, I visited Mom for the weekend. I was going through some things back then, nothing dramatic, just the slow unraveling of a relationship. The way normal life can feel heavy when too many small disappointments pile up. I wanted to be somewhere familiar, and her house still felt like that. It was Saturday morning. I was heading out to grab coffee when I saw the boy for the first time up close. He was crouched low by the front bumper of my car, his head tilted to one side like he was trying to listen to the engine. At first, I thought he was just looking at the reflection in the paint or maybe the tire. Then I realized his rubber ball had rolled underneath. It was half sticking out near the passenger side front wheel. I told him something dumb like, "No worries," or "Got it," and bent down to grab the ball. He didn't move. He just watched me with those pale, flat eyes. When I handed it to him, he took it slowly with both hands, like he was lifting something alive. He cradled it against his chest, his arms long and strangely still, and just looked up at me. His eyes weren't blank exactly. They were more like hollow, not in a dramatic way, just like no one was really home behind them. His mouth was slightly open, slack, and he kept his head at that odd angle, like a bird trying to understand something. I smiled at him, not sure why, just instinct, and backed away. He didn't smile back. He didn't blink, just stood there on the edge of the sidewalk, gripping that ball like an egg. I walked into the house and glanced back before I closed the door. He was still there, still staring. Same pose, like a statue or a mannequin someone had forgotten to move. I told my girlfriend about it later that day, back when we were still trying to make things work, and she gave me the kind of soft, harmless answer I'd expected. That he probably didn't know how to say thank you. That maybe he wanted to, but got stuck in his head. I nodded along and forgot about it. Later that night, I decided to sleep over. The weather had shifted. Those hot Santa Ana winds had started to blow, and the whole neighborhood took on a different feeling. If you've ever lived in Southern California, you know what I mean. The air gets dry and sharp, and the wind doesn't blow in gusts like it does in most places. It pushes in long, steady currents, rattling windows and groaning through the trees. It makes everything feel more brittle. I couldn't sleep. My old room upstairs hadn't changed much since I left. Same posters on the walls, same creaky twin bed, same weird closet with a sliding door that never quite stayed shut. I sat at the small desk by the window and stared at my laptop, scrolling through articles and videos without really absorbing anything. Around 2 a.m, I heard something that made me pause. A trash can rolling down the street, loud and metallic, skidding in fits and starts across the pavement. It echoed in that open, hollow way things do at night. I peeked through the blinds. The wind was still going strong. A couple of porch lights across the way flickered. No one was outside. Then I heard the house alarm. Just a chime, not the full siren. A soft, mechanical voice. Beep, beep, front door open. That had happened before. The front door was old, and if you didn't pull it shut all the way, the wind could work it loose. It made me jump anyway. I stood up and opened my bedroom door. The hallway was pitch black. No light from the stairwell, none from the window at the end of the hall. Just dark and silent except for the whisper of wind pressing against the house. I stepped into the hallway barefoot and ran my hand along the wall until I found the switch. The light flicked on and I froze. At the top of the stairs, less than 10 feet away, stood the boy, the same one from across the street. He was just standing there, staring directly at me, with that same head tilt, that same open mouth, and those empty eyes. I didn't move at first. My heart didn't even start racing. It just stopped completely, like something had short-circuited in my brain. He wasn't supposed to be there. There was no sound of the door opening, no warning. Just him, right there, close enough for me to see the folds in his t-shirt and the faint smear of dirt on his cheek. He didn't say anything. He didn't look angry or sad or anything, really. Just blank. His arms hung loose at his sides. He didn't have the ball with him this time. He was barefoot. I could see the slight arch in his toes, like he had walked across the street quietly, maybe slowly, maybe carefully. I thought about yelling, but I didn't want to scare him. I thought about waking my mom, but something about the moment felt so fragile I didn't want to break it. I stepped forward slowly and reached out my hand. He didn't flinch. His fingers were long and thin, too thin for a kid his age. I don't mean freakishly so, just enough that you noticed. His skin was cold. Not freezing, not dead cold, just enough to feel wrong. He let me guide him. No resistance. We walked down the stairs slowly, my hand lightly gripping his. The front door was open a crack. The wind hissed through it, moving the sheer curtain like a ghost. I didn't say a word as we stepped outside. The street was empty. I led him across the pavement, glancing around for anyone else. No caregiver, no parent. The front door was wide open too, swinging slowly back and forth. I walked him up the path and into his house. It was dark inside. I didn't go past the threshold. As soon as he stepped in, he let go of my hand and disappeared into the shadows. I stood there for a second, listening. Nothing, just the wind again. I turned and hurried back to my mom's, closing the door tight behind me and locking it. Twice. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I didn't say anything to my mom about it. I wasn't sure how to even bring it up. I looked out the window a few times over breakfast, but everything across the street looked normal again. The door was closed. The curtains were drawn. A different caregiver was outside by noon, watching the boy as he bounced his ball again like nothing had happened. A few days later, I mentioned the incident to a friend who works with kids like him, quietly, vaguely. He said something similar to what my ex had said, that kids with autism sometimes wander, that he might not have understood where he was, that maybe he'd just gotten confused, maybe the wind spooked him, maybe it pulled the door open and he followed it. It happens. I wanted to believe that. I still do, but that wasn't the part that stayed with me. It was the way he looked at me, not afraid, not lost, not even confused, just watching, staring like he was trying to recognize something he'd almost remembered. There was no panic in his eyes, no urgency, just that blank, hollow stillness, and the cold in his hand. Weeks passed, then months. I avoided visiting at night. I made excuses, said I was busy, or stayed only for lunch and left before sundown. Every time I drove past that house, I slowed down just a little. Their front door was always shut now. I stopped seeing him outside as often. The caregivers changed. The woman who used to watch him every afternoon stopped showing up. A new man was there most days, standing stiffly with his hands in his jacket pockets. I looked the house up online once. I found their names. I found a few mentions in the neighborhood newsletter about community events and school fundraisers. Normal stuff, nothing out of place. Then, maybe 2 months ago, I visited again. I stayed over. I made sure to lock the door, to double-check the latch, even wedged a chair under the handle like I used to do in college when I lived in sketchy apartments. I felt ridiculous doing it, but I did it anyway. The night passed quietly. The wind wasn't blowing. No alarms, no footsteps, no visitors. In the morning, I walked outside with my coffee and looked across the street. The boy was out again, standing near the curb, tossing the ball gently up and down. He looked exactly the same. As I stood there, watching, he stopped bouncing the ball. He turned and looked directly at me. His head tilted, his mouth hung open, and those eyes, still empty, still watching. I finished my coffee and went back inside. I haven't stayed over since. There's nothing supernatural about this. No ghosts, no... I didn't leave the children's hospital because of what happened with the boy, not entirely. But it was one of the last things before I gave my notice, and I still think about it sometimes. Not in a daydreaming way, either. More like when I'm laying in bed too late at night, trying to close my eyes and not think about what could have happened that night. Because if I let my brain go there, if I really let it sit with all the details, it's not hard to imagine how things might have ended differently. How I might not be sitting here now, or how someone else might have ended up seriously hurt. And not just in the ways kids in that unit usually were, quiet damage, long-term stuff. I mean real, visible harm. Bruises, broken bones, blood. And it all started with a boy they brought in for observation. I don't remember his exact age anymore, maybe 9 or 10, but he looked smaller than he was. He had those 2 big eyes and a face that made you think of a raccoon, thin, and always twitching. He looked like a kid who never slept all the way through the night. That's probably because he didn't. I was working in inpatient psych at the time. The kids came in for all sorts of reasons. Some were pulled straight from dangerous homes, others after attempts to hurt themselves. Sometimes schools called it in when a child became a danger to others. And sometimes it was a mix of all those things. This boy had been removed from his home after a mix of complaints from teachers, neighbors, and eventually an ER visit. From what I remember in the paperwork, he'd been through about as bad a time as a kid can go through. Both physically and sexually abused, often locked up at night, sometimes deprived of food, and exposed to violence constantly. He had a long list of diagnoses, but none of them really captured what it felt like to be around him. He came in with this bright, animated attitude. That threw people off. A lot of the new staff thought he seemed fine at first, talkative, even funny, always watching everything. But anyone who spent a little more time with him started to see the gaps in him. The way he never really attached to anyone. He didn't seem to feel shame or guilt the way other kids might. He'd do something that would land any other kid in a long talk or a breakdown. Pulling down his pants in front of another kid, trying to sneak into the nurse's cabinet, and then just go about his day like nothing happened. Staff had to keep a constant eye on him. He didn't like being told no. When he wanted something, he'd go for it. And if someone tried to block him, he could flip in an instant. We had incident reports on him almost daily. Once he bit another kid. Another time, he tried to jam a pencil into the wall socket. Another day, I caught him with a sharpened spoon he'd hidden in a shoe. He was what staff sometimes quietly called a ticking one. You'd never say that out loud in front of anyone, but people knew what it meant. He wasn't always exploding, but you knew it was coming. You just didn't know when. One night, this part one wasn't there for. He got his hands on a chain. Still don't know where he found it. It might have been from one of the beds or a utility cart. We never figured it out, but it wasn't a small chain either. Thick, maybe 2 feet long and heavy. He started swinging it down the hallway, screaming that he was going to get out. A nurse and a psych tech were able to stop him before anyone got hurt. They cornered him at the end of one hallway and talked him down enough to take it away without getting injured. There weren't any security guards on our floor overnight, just staff and a locked elevator. So if something really violent happened, it was on us to handle it. They were lucky that night. 2 nights later, I was on shift. I worked overnight sometimes when they needed coverage. Not my favorite, but it wasn't terrible. The unit was quieter then, usually. Less activity, less screaming, less group therapy. More of just watching over everyone, checking vitals when needed, preparing charts, buzzing in visitors if someone came by early, that kind of thing. I sat in the reception area, which was enclosed by a high counter and thick glass. It wasn't technically a secure room, but patients weren't allowed in there, and the door was kept shut from the inside. The only way in or out was with a staff badge or if someone inside opened it for you. That night, I had the paperwork for 3 incoming charts spread out in front of me, and I was halfway through sorting meds and incident notes when I heard a sound behind me. It wasn't loud, just something soft like someone shifting their feet. I turned around without thinking, expecting to see another staff member. He was right behind me. I don't know how he got in there. To this day, I've replayed it over and over, trying to figure it out. My best guess is someone didn't close the door all the way earlier, maybe during a med pass or when the nurse went to grab a form. But there he was, standing inside the reception space, directly behind me. His eyes were wide, glazed, and he was breathing hard. Not like he'd been running, more like someone trying not to cry or scream. His arms were hanging at his sides, his fingers twitching, and his shirt was damp with sweat. I hadn't even heard the door open. I hadn't heard footsteps. Nothing. 1 second, I was alone. The next, I wasn't. I stood up fast, trying not to startle him, backing a little toward the corner near the cabinet. My body went cold all at once. I said something dumb, like, "I should get the nurse," my voice shaking. He didn't say anything, just watched me. The look on his face, it wasn't hate, not exactly. It was more like a kind of buzzing, desperate intensity. Like his skin was too tight and his brain was about to burst out of his skull. He didn't seem to know what he was doing. Not fully. He was in survival mode. Feral. I slipped out the door on the side, keeping one eye on him, and the second I stepped through, he bolted. He didn't run toward the nurse's station or his room. He ran for the button. There was a wall panel near the outer door that buzzed the lock. It had a delay of a few seconds, enough time for someone to open the door from the other side, or to exit quickly if it was approved. He slammed his hand on it and then leapt onto the reception counter, trying to scramble over it before the door clicked shut again. He wasn't fast enough. The door locked again with a heavy clunk. He stood there on the counter, panting, gripping the edge with both hands, looking at the door like it had betrayed him. Then he dropped down and ran back into the unit. I found the nurse and told her everything. She was already on her way over. Apparently, he'd been throwing things earlier that evening and had to be calmed down multiple times. She managed to get him back into the timeout room, though it took some coaxing. She stayed with him most of the night, keeping him in either there or his assigned room, trying to prevent another incident. I kept working at my desk, the reception door locked tight, my hands shaking whenever I tried to pick up a pen. The rest of that shift passed slowly. I kept thinking about how he had looked when I turned around, sweating, wide-eyed, out of breath. It was the look of someone who wasn't in control anymore. He wasn't trying to scare me. I don't even think he really saw me. I think in that moment, I was just part of the environment to him. An obstacle between him and freedom. Something to get around. Later, when I went back through the reports, I learned he'd been left unsupervised for just a few minutes when he slipped into the timeout room. He must have waited inside, hiding, until someone passed by or the reception door was left cracked. We weren't supposed to lock the timeout room unless it was an emergency, and this wasn't called in as one. Maybe that was the mistake. 4 days afterward, I kept playing out the what-ifs. What if he'd had that chain with him? What if he'd waited until I was turned around, then used it on me before I had a chance to react? What if he'd actually gotten out through the door? What would he have done if he made it past the unit? Past the elevator? Past the first floor security? Where'd he have gone? Who might he have hurt? But the worst question was the one that still lingers in the back of my head sometimes. What if he wanted to hurt someone? No one got hurt that night. Not really. I was rattled. The nurse was exhausted. He was corralled. That was it. No police. No restraints. Just another entry in the incident report binder. Just another shift. But it stuck with me. That wasn't the night I quit. I kept working for a few more months. But that shift was the beginning of the end for me. After that, I started looking at the patients differently, not out of fear or resentment, but with this deep awareness that anything could happen, that some of the kids in that place had lived through horrors I couldn't begin to understand, and sometimes what they carried inside them came out fast and violent. They weren't bad kids. They were broken kids, but broken in ways that sometimes couldn't be safely held. Eventually, I turned to my notice. I told them I needed a change of pace. I didn't go into detail. I didn't talk about the boy or that night or the way my hands still shook every time I worked a night shift alone. I moved on to outpatient care. I still work with children, but in a different capacity. Less emergency, less risk, less threat. I don't know where that boy is now. He'd be a teenager by now. Maybe in high school. Maybe in a group home. Maybe in juvenile detention. Or maybe he's dead. That thought crossed my mind too. Because kids like that, the ones who fall through the cracks and never really find safety, they don't always make it. And that's not because they're doomed. It's because we fail them over and over, and then we act surprised when they snap. I hope he's okay. I really do. But sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking about the way he looked behind me, sweating, desperate, breathing like he couldn't get air. Like he would have done anything to get out. Anything. And I think about how lucky I was that he didn't have the chain that night. And how maybe that was all that stood between. When I was around 10 years old, my parents decided to extend the house. We weren't cramped or anything, but they had been saving up for a while and figured it was time to add more space. My mom wanted a larger kitchen that opened out into the back garden, and my dad, who worked from home a few days a week, wanted a small office tucked away from everything else. On top of that, they decided to convert the attic into a new bedroom, which they offered to me. I think they wanted to make up for the fact that I'd have to deal with all the noise and dust during the months of building. At the time, the idea of having the attic as my room sounded like the best thing ever. It felt grown up. It had sloped ceilings, a skylight, and just enough space for my bed, a desk, and some shelves. The only odd thing was the layout. The The stairs came straight up from the hallway, curving tightly, and ended right at the foot of my bed. There wasn't a door at the top of the staircase, just a half wall to stop you from falling back down. So when you lay on the bed, the stairs were right there at your feet, open, dark, and quiet at night. I didn't mind it at first. I was used to sleeping with some noise anyway. I had this small radio, an old black thing with a metal antenna, that sat on a table at the base of the stairs. I used to turn it on quietly before going to bed and listen to whatever helped me relax. Sometimes pop music, sometimes late night talk shows, sometimes classical music when I felt like I needed something slower to drift off to. It wasn't anything fancy. No CDs, no cassette, just radio. The signal was decent as long as the antenna was at the right angle. Because the radio sat downstairs, I could keep the volume really low and the sound would carry up the staircase just enough to reach me while I lay in bed. It was a soft hum that didn't bother my parents, whose room was just off the hallway on that same level. That's how I liked it. I didn't want them getting annoyed and telling me to shut it off. Over time, it became part of my routine. I'd brush my teeth, go upstairs, lie back under the skylight, and let the quiet notes or distant voices take me into sleep. I probably did that for over a year without anything strange happening. Even during the construction, with all the hammering and drilling during the day, my nights were peaceful. I'd grown used to the way the house sounded, the creaks in the floors, the boiler kicking on in the middle of the night, the muffled sound of my parents talking or watching TV. It became like background noise, the kind of stuff you hear so often that you stop noticing it. But one night, maybe around autumn, judging by the way the wind tapped on the skylight, I decided to switch things up and put the radio on the classical station. I'd listened to it before, but not very often. That night, I remember feeling a bit anxious for some reason. Nothing major, just a kind of restlessness I couldn't shake. I thought the slower tempo of the music would help me settle. I turned the volume to just above a whisper, tested it from the top of the stairs like I always did, and got into bed. It was one of those clear nights where the sky looked too big, stars just hanging there with nothing between them and me but the glass. I lay there listening to soft violins and the occasional crackle of static, and eventually I must have drifted off. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still dark. The skylight above me was black, and the house felt heavy in that particular way it does when everyone's asleep. But there was sound, loud sound, the kind that doesn't just wake you. It yanks you up like cold water in the face. I was upright in seconds, heart pounding, completely disoriented. It wasn't the boiler or the creaks or the wind. It was music, loud, unnatural, and wrong. The first thing I remember thinking was that someone had cranked the radio up. I sat there blinking at the staircase, frozen. The sound was coming from below, definitely the radio, but it wasn't classical music anymore. It was singing or something like it. A voice, warped and slow, stretched out over notes that didn't seem to match. It wasn't a language I recognized. It wasn't English. The pitch wobbled like it was being pulled apart, too deep one moment, too high the next. It sounded like someone was trying to sing through a broken speaker, and the words came out thick and garbled, like a record melting. And it was loud, not just a bit louder than I left it. This was full blast, echoing up the stairwell, bouncing off the walls of the hallway. It filled the house. I sat on my bed, paralyzed. For maybe 30 seconds I didn't move. I just stared at the dark rectangle of the stair opening, expecting someone or something to walk up it. The sound made the space feel unfamiliar. It made the air feel dense. My arms and legs prickled with that awful kind of fear you can't think your way out of. I finally snapped out of it and ran. I jumped off the bed, took the stairs 2 at a time, and nearly slipped at the bottom because my socks had no grip on the polished floor. I reached the little table and slammed the power button on the radio. The sound died immediately. No fade out, no distortion tailing off, just silence. I stood there in the hallway, heart hammering in my ears. My parents' door was shut, and everything else was still. I waited, half expecting them to come out yelling about the noise, but the house stayed quiet. I remember tiptoeing to their door and pressing my ear against it. Nothing. No stirring. No questions. No angry footsteps. I crept back to the radio and turned it on again, carefully, nervously. The volume knob hadn't moved. It was exactly where I left it. And the station, still the classical one. I turned it off again. I didn't want to hear anything else that night. I went back upstairs, but I didn't sleep. I just lay in bed, staring up through the skylight until the sky turned a lighter shade of blue and the sounds of the house started to return. The next morning, I went downstairs early and checked the radio. I moved the antenna. I switched the station and switched back. Everything seemed normal. The classical music station was still playing exactly the type of music I expected. No voices, no lyrics, no signs of whatever had blared through the house the night before. I even sat with it for a while, listening, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. At breakfast, I waited for my parents to say something. They didn't. I asked if they heard anything during the night, kept it casual, like, "Did you hear that storm?" or something. My mom shook her head. My dad didn't even look up from his paper. Neither of them had heard it. The house was old, and sound carried. We all knew that. But somehow, the sound that had filled every corner of my body hadn't touched theirs at all. I never played the radio to fall asleep again after that. At first, I thought maybe it was a dream, some kind of half-asleep hallucination or sleep paralysis. But I was on my feet. I ran down those stairs. I hit the power button on the radio. I remember every second. I remember the way my socks slid, the way the sound hit me in the chest, the panic. Years passed, and I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there was interference. Maybe the radio picked up some bizarre signal from a nearby truck or building. Maybe someone hacked into the frequency, or maybe the radio malfunctioned. I even Googled it a few times, pirate signals, radio hijacks, that kind of thing. It happens, apparently, but not often, and not usually in the middle of the night on a classical music station at a volume I didn't set. I've owned a few radios since then. I've had cars with FM, Bluetooth speakers, all of it. I use headphones when I work, but even now, if music starts playing unexpectedly, I flinch. If I fall asleep and wake up to sound, any sound, I get that same cold jolt through my chest. It's not about ghosts or anything supernatural. I don't believe in that stuff. I've never had anything like that happen before or since. I think what scared me the most was how something so ordinary, something I used every night to comfort myself, could suddenly flip and become a threat. It made me realize how thin the wall is between routine and terror, between calm and chaos. Sometimes late at night, I'll remember the way that voice sounded. Not the words, because I don't think they were words, but the shape of it, the way it filled up the space. It didn't sound like a person. It sounded like a recording played through a mouth full of water. Slowed down, choked, and yet it wasn't random. There was rhythm to it, a kind of melody, something that wanted to be understood. But I'm glad I never understood it. Whatever that moment was, whatever caused the sound, I don't need an explanation. I've made peace with not knowing. I don't want to solve it. I don't want to replicate it. I wanted to stay buried in that one night of my life. Because I've come to realize the scariest things aren't the ones we can't explain. They're the ones that almost make sense. The ones that seem like they should be harmless. A radio, a song, a whisper at the foot of the stairs. I still live with that feeling. Not all the time, but it comes back in little ways. Like when I stay in a hotel room with thin walls and hear a voice I can't place. Or when my phone picks up interference and plays static in my earbuds. Or when I wake up and it's just a little too quiet and I wonder if something's waiting for me to turn the volume up again. I've kept that old radio, by the way. It's in a box in the garage, wrapped up in a towel next to some of my old books and toys. I haven't turned it on in over 15 years, but I haven't thrown it out either. I don't really know why. Maybe part of me wants to prove it was real. Maybe I'm just not ready to hear it again. Or maybe, if I'm honest, I'm afraid that if I ever do turn it on again, it won't play anything. I haven't thought about this in years, but sometimes the memory still shows up in my mind without warning. Quiet and sudden, like something slipping in through a cracked window. It always hits me the same way. My stomach clenches, my chest gets tight, and I feel like a kid again. I was only 8 when it happened, and no matter how much time passes, I've never been able to shake it. Back then, I didn't know how much the smallest decisions, like which path to take, could stick with you for a lifetime. I grew up in a small town, the kind of place where every street looked the same and everyone knew each other's business. Our house was a plain single story, with vinyl siding and a small porch where my mom liked to sit when the weather was nice. My friend Jacob lived 2 streets over. We were inseparable that summer, always running around barefoot and sweaty, chasing each other through sprinklers, kicking balls until it got too dark to see. To get to Jacob's house, I had 2 options. I could walk around the block, which added 5 to 10 minutes to the trip, or I could cut straight through a few backyards, which would drop me off right at the street. Most kids would have picked the shortcut, and I was no different. There was one yard in particular that I always had to cross. It belonged to this older guy named Mr. Rayner. He was retired, I think, and he didn't seem to care that the neighborhood kids walked through his yard. In fact, I hardly ever saw him. His house was tall and narrow with faded white siding, set back behind a small patch of patchy grass. I only remember seeing him once or twice, usually sitting inside near the window with the TV glowing behind him. The house had an odd feel to it, even back then. Not scary, just quiet. Too quiet. No dog, no wind chimes, no decorations or toys outside like most of the other homes. There was a single bush in the front, trimmed down to an almost perfect sphere. The blinds on the windows were always slightly tilted down, never fully open, never fully closed. I never thought too much of it. I just walked through the yard like I always did and kept my head down. It was a Saturday when it happened. I remember because I was bored, and weekends usually meant my mom was home cleaning and the day felt longer than usual. The sun was already high up, the kind of summer heat that made the pavement hot under my feet. I was wearing old sneakers with holes in the toes, a faded Ninja Turtle shirt, and shorts that were a size too big. I had just eaten a bowl of cereal, milk still sticking to the back of my throat, when I decided to head over to Jacob's to see if he wanted to ride bikes or play war in the woods behind his place. I let the screen door slap behind me and jogged across our yard, cutting through the narrow alley between 2 houses, just like always. The grass in the shortcut was dry and cracked beneath my feet. There wasn't a breeze. No birds. Just heat, stillness, and the quiet creak of insects hiding in the weeds. I remember stepping into Mr. Rayner's yard and immediately feeling like something was different. Not wrong, exactly, just off. The kind of feeling you get when someone walks into the room behind you and you don't hear them, but you know they're there. I looked up at the house. Everything looked the same as usual. No lights on, no sound from inside. The blinds were tilted just like always. I kept walking, cutting a straight path through the yard toward the street on the other side. I don't know what made me look back. Maybe I felt watched. Maybe it was just habit. But when I got to the edge of the yard, I stopped and turned. There, in the window, was a shadow. It was behind the second window from the left on the first floor. A huge, black shape standing still behind the blinds. Not moving, not swaying, just there. I froze. My skin went cold even though it was hot out. My heart started pounding. I couldn't make out any features. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an object. It was just a shape, solid black, tall, broad, completely out of place. It had to be inside the house, not a reflection. It wasn't in front of the window. It was behind it. I stood there for maybe a second, maybe less. Then I turned and ran. I didn't think. I didn't look around. I didn't stop until I got all the way home and slammed the door shut behind me. My mom was somewhere in the back of the house, vacuuming or folding laundry. I went to my room and sat on my bed, legs shaking, heart still thudding in my chest. I kept thinking about the shape, how dark it was, how still it had been. After a while, I worked up the nerve to tell someone. I tried to explain what I'd seen to my mom, then later to Jacob. Neither of them believed me. They didn't say I was lying outright, but they dismissed it with that tone adults use when they don't want to argue with a kid. Maybe it was a curtain. Maybe it was the sun. Maybe I had imagined it. I could tell by the look in their eyes that they didn't believe a word I was saying. I never walked through that yard again. For a while, I avoided Jacob's house altogether. When I did go, I'd take the long way around, walking past 3 extra houses just to avoid cutting through Mr. Rayner's property. Every time I passed the house from the street, I kept my head turned away. But even from the corner of my eye, I could tell those blinds never moved. The house sat there like it always did, silent, unbothered, empty. At some point, life moved on. Summer ended, school started, and the memory faded a little. I still thought about it from time to time, but I learned not to bring it up. I knew what people thought when I told the story. That I was a kid with a wild imagination. That I saw a coat rack or a tall lamp and let my mind run away with it. But I knew what I saw, and it wasn't something normal. It wasn't something that should have been in that window. Years went by. I grew up, left that town, went to college. The memory of that moment stayed with me, buried under everything else like a photo at the bottom of a box. Every now and then, though, would rise to the surface, especially when I passed an empty house or saw blinds tilted the same way or felt that same heavy stillness in the air. About 5 years ago, I went back to visit my mom after she had surgery. I hadn't been back in a long time. The town hadn't changed much. Some of the stores were different, and a few new houses had gone up, but most of it looked exactly like it had when I was a kid. One morning, I went for a walk through the old neighborhood, just to see what it felt like. My legs carried me without thinking, following the old route I used to take to Jacob's. When I reached the alley, I paused. Mr. Rayner's house was still there. It looked older, more worn. The paint had chipped and peeled in long gray streaks, and the bushes out front had grown wild. The grass was high and yellowed. One of the gutters had come loose and hung off the side like a bent arm. But the windows, they still had the same blinds, tilted just like I remembered, and they were still down. I stood there for a long time, staring. The memories came back in a rush. My feet on the cracked lawn, the heat, the silence, the shadow. My chest felt tight again, like it did when I was 8. I didn't go closer. I just stood there at the edge of the yard. Later that afternoon, I asked my mom about the house. I didn't mention what I'd seen. I just said I noticed the place looked abandoned. She told me Mr. Rayner had died. Years ago. Heart attack. He'd been found by a Meals on Wheels volunteer who came to check on him after he stopped answering the door. They said he'd been dead for at least a week before anyone found him. Alone. No family. No visitors. The thing that got me, though, was the date. She said he died sometime in August, around the middle of the month. She wasn't sure exactly. Just remember the gossip going around. People saying it was a shame he hadn't been found sooner. That was the same summer I saw the shadow in the window. I didn't say anything. I didn't argue or try to dig deeper. I just nodded and changed the subject. But inside, I felt cold. Looking back, I think I understand what I saw. I think Mr. Rayner was already dead when I walked through that yard. I think he died alone in that house, probably days before anyone noticed. And I think what I saw that day, what I thought was a shadow, was probably his body. It makes sense now, even if I hate the thought. The position of the shadow, how tall and still it was. If he had collapsed or died near the window, maybe propped up against the wall or slumped in a chair, his body could have cast that exact shape behind blinds. In the heat, with the house closed up, everything would have been preserved just long enough for me to see it. I was too young to understand what death looked like. I had no frame of reference. My brain couldn't process it, so it turned it into something else, something faceless and dark. A shadow. That's the part that still haunts me. Not the shadow itself, but the fact that I saw a dead man and didn't realize it. That I ran away from a corpse, not a ghost. And that, for years, everyone thought I was lying or imagining things, when really I'd stumbled across something no child should ever see. There was no monster in the window, no spirit, no curse, just an old man, forgotten by the world, left to rot in a silent house while the summer days passed him by. I still see that window sometimes when I close my eyes. The shape behind the blinds, the heat in the air, the silence. I've never told anyone the full story, not until now. But maybe it's time. Maybe it's enough just to say what happened. Not to scare anyone, not to chase attention, but because it's real. Because the dead don't always rest where we expect them to. Sometimes they're right there behind the blinds, waiting for someone to see them. And sometimes that someone is just a kid. I grew up in a house that was built in 1809. My parents bought it when I was just a kid, probably around 6 or 7. It was this big, old house on a quiet street, with a wide front yard and a wraparound porch that needed painting. The shingles were original, the windows were huge, and the floors creaked even when nobody was walking on them. My parents bought it after the woman who lived there died at 89. They got a good deal on it because it had been sitting for a while and it needed work. But they were excited about it. They called it a piece of history. At first, the house just felt old. The kind of old where everything groans when you touch it, and you're always cold even when the sun's out. But it wasn't long before certain parts of it started to feel different, off, somehow. My bedroom especially. It was at the top of the stairs, facing the back of the house, and had a wide closet door that never stayed shut no matter how many times I pulled it closed. I was still little then, but I remember things. I remember how cold that room always felt, even in the middle of summer. The kind of cold that didn't go away with blankets or space heaters. It was a different kind of cold, thin and deep and still. And the closet always had this strange smell coming from it. Sweet, sharp, and old. Like a strong perfume that had sat in a bottle for decades, then spilled all at once. Not a bad smell at first, just strong and out of place, and eventually it made me feel sick to my stomach. Sometimes the closet door would slowly swing open on its own. Other times, it would shut all the way even if I left it cracked. I never actually saw it move. I'd just look up, and it would be different from how I left it. I didn't have a lot of toys or decorations in my room, but the few things I did have would end up in places I didn't put them. A book I'd been reading would be under the bed instead of on the dresser. My shoes would be lined up facing the wrong way. My lamp would be on the floor, unplugged. It was always small things. Easy to brush off, I guess. But they added up. What bothered me more than anything was the feeling. At night, once the house got quiet and the air got heavy, I could feel something or someone sitting at the edge of the bed. It didn't press down like a person's full weight, just enough that I could tell the mattress moved. I'd feel the shift and freeze completely. Then the air would change, and I'd have this sharp, awful awareness that I wasn't alone. I couldn't see anything, but I knew something was watching me. I'd lie there for hours, barely breathing, my eyes wide open in the dark. Sometimes I thought I saw shadows moving, but I didn't want to believe it. I'd turn my head fast to look, and there would be nothing there. But the feeling never left. It was always there when I was brushing my teeth, doing homework, even when I was outside, looking up at my bedroom window. That was the worst part. When I was outside and could see into my room, I'd sometimes get the sense that someone was standing just inside the window, looking down at me. I never saw a face. I never saw a figure. But I felt it. My parents didn't notice much at first. They were busy. My dad worked long hours, and my mom stayed home with us, but she was always on the phone or out running errands. My younger brother and I were left alone a lot, especially once we got old enough to take care of ourselves. He never seemed bothered by the house. Maybe he just didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't want to. As time went on, I started noticing smells in different parts of the house. Not just in my room. There was a window on the stairs, an old, narrow one that looked out over the neighborhood. On certain days, when the light hit it just right and the house was quiet, I'd walk past it and suddenly smell that same sweet perfume. Not a faint trace, strong, overwhelming, almost cloying. The smell moved sometimes like someone was walking. You'd smell it near the kitchen, then the hallway, then the base of the stairs. And every time the smell came, the temperature dropped like a switch had been flipped. I'd get goosebumps up and down my arms, and my ears would ring a little like I was underwater. It always left just as fast as it came. We started losing things too. Nothing valuable, just things we used daily. A set of keys, a hairbrush, a phone charger. My dad would get frustrated when something was missing, but he always blamed us. Then we'd find it in the weirdest places. The hairbrush in the freezer, a set of keys tucked inside a shoe in the hall closet, a butter knife in the washing machine. It was always something small and strange enough that you'd question your own memory. I started writing things down. I kept a notebook under my bed where I wrote where I put things just so I could check later and make sure I wasn't losing my mind. The basement, though, that was something else. It was unfinished like most basements in old houses. Dirt floor, thick cement walls, open beams above. The stairs were wooden and old, and they had wide gaps between each step so you could see through them. I hated that. I never liked turning my back to them because it felt like something or someone could reach through and grab my legs. Every time I had to go down there, I ran. I'd flip the light switch at the top and bolt down as fast as I could, grab whatever I needed, and run back up before the light chain stopped swaying. I never stayed long enough to look around. Nothing ever happened to me down there, not exactly. But the feeling was the worst in that space. It wasn't just fear, it was dread. Thick and electric, like the moment before a lightning strike. I always felt like if I turned around too fast, I'd see something that I couldn't ever unsee. So I didn't. I kept my eyes forward and got out as fast as I could. When I was 14, my parents decided to renovate the basement. They wanted to give me more space, and I had been complaining about how cold my upstairs room was. I didn't fight the decision. At the time, the idea of moving out of that room seemed like a relief. I thought maybe it would help. So we cleaned out the basement, put in new walls and carpet, and turned the far side into a small bedroom with a sliding door. My bed was set up in the corner near the furnace closet, and I had a little desk and a shelf for my books. It looked cozy enough when it was finished. At first, it wasn't bad. It was quieter down there. No creaky floors above. No wind rattling the windows. I even slept better the first few weeks. But then the feelings started creeping back. Slowly at first. Like a draft I couldn't find the source of. I started to get that sensation again of someone watching me. I'd be at my desk, doing homework, and feel like someone was behind me. I'd turn around fast, and of course, no one would be there. The shadows in the corner of the room felt thicker than they should have been, and they shifted in ways that didn't line up with the light. I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye, and when I looked, everything would be still. Then the pounding started. It always came late at night, never during the day. It was this low, dull thud at first, like something was tapping from the other side of the wall. Then it would build slowly, getting faster and louder, until it sounded like fists slamming into the wall right beside my head. It would stop just as suddenly. I'd sit up in bed, heart racing, trying to breathe. Some nights it didn't happen. Other nights, it would happen more than once. It wasn't the pipes. I knew what the furnace sounded like, and this wasn't it. The feeling of being watched turned into something more physical. I started to feel pressure on the back of my neck, like someone was standing behind me, breathing against my skin. I couldn't focus on anything. I stopped eating much, and I barely slept. I'd lie awake for hours with the blankets pulled up to my chin, my eyes locked on the door. I felt like if I closed my eyes for even a second, something would happen. I slipped into a depression without realizing it. I stopped going out. I stopped seeing friends. I spent most of my time in the basement, just lying on my bed or staring at the walls. I don't remember much about those months except the heavy, dark feeling that hung over me like fog. I couldn't shake it. One night, I was home alone. My parents had gone out, and my brother was staying at a friend's house. It was winter, and the house was quiet. I went upstairs to get a drink of water. The kitchen was dark, but I didn't turn on the lights. I just stood at the sink, drinking slowly, trying to calm down. The back door was made of glass, and it led out to the porch. The door always fogged up in the winter from the condensation. As I stood there, I saw something move. 2 handprints appeared on the glass, clear and defined. Then, right between them, a breath mark. It fogged and disappeared. I stared at it for what felt like forever. I didn't move. My hands started shaking, and my stomach dropped. It felt like something in me had snapped. Not loudly, just a quiet, awful snap. I couldn't move at first. I stood there, frozen, staring at the door like it would break open. Finally, my legs kicked in and I ran. I didn't go back downstairs. I didn't go to my room. I ran out the front door, barefoot, and sat on the porch. It was freezing and the boards dug into my skin, but I didn't care. I stayed there all night, curled up on the bench, too afraid to go back inside. My brother found me the next morning when he came home. I was 15 then. I moved out of the house 7 months later when I got into an early college program. I didn't think twice. I packed my things, avoided the basement, and left. I haven't been back inside since. Years later, my mom divorced my dad, and they sold the house. We were talking one day, and she finally told me what I'd never known, that the old woman who owned the house before us had died. This story is probably one of the single most terrifying and exhilarating nights of my life. I was in a car chase, not a movie-style one, not some kind of prank, but a real-life, heart-pounding chase where I honestly thought I might die. It all started over something stupid, like most of these kinds of stories probably do. I grew up in a weird area, kind of a border zone between rough inner-city neighborhoods and quiet, sleepy small towns. Where I lived, you could drive 15 minutes in one direction and be in a quiet cul-de-sac with sprinklers hissing on manicured lawns, and 15 minutes in the other direction would put you in the middle of gang turf, flashing colors, and boarded-up storefronts. Back in high school, things got so bad that the National Guard had to come in and help local law enforcement. That wasn't a rumor or a news story from far away. It was real. I saw Humvees rolling through intersections and guardsmen carrying rifles down the sidewalks. That was my normal for a while. The other thing about growing up there was that if you wanted to do anything remotely fun, go bowling, catch a movie, hit up a diner, you had to drive into those sketchier areas. There weren't many safe options. So every night out came with a little bit of risk baked in, a kind of unspoken understanding. You keep your head down, you don't stare at anyone too long, and you get in and out without drawing attention to yourself. That was the code. It was a Friday night when all this happened. A new Rocky reboot had just come out. Me and my two closest friends, John and Jack, decided to hit the late show. John was the strong, quiet type, stoic, broad-shouldered, the kind of guy who walked slow and never seemed nervous. He had played linebacker in high school and captained the team. If you needed someone solid at your back, it was John. Jack was the opposite. Loud, always laughing, always poking at people. He was quick with a joke and loved to mess with strangers, just enough to irritate them, but not quite enough to start a fight. Jack could be obnoxious, sure, but deep down he was a good guy. He just didn't know when to stop. At the time, he was pitching semi-pro baseball. He had a cannon for an arm and never let you forget it. The movie let out late. It was close to midnight. We left the theater and stepped into the cool air of the parking lot, still joking about the film and acting like idiots. That post-movie energy was still buzzing in our chests. The lot was almost empty, just a few scattered cars and puddles reflecting the orange glow of the streetlights. That's when we saw it, a beat-up car parked not far from mine. Calling it beat-up doesn't do it justice. It had been destroyed, dents all over, every window shattered. Someone had shoveled dirt into the driver's seat. A metal trash can have been flipped upside down and crushed onto the roof. Garbage from the can was smeared down the sides. The tires were shredded. And right on top, perfectly balanced, was one of those giant plastic Big Gulp cups from 7-Eleven. The whole thing looked like a scene from a cartoon. Someone had completely flipped out on this car. It wasn't vandalism, it was rage. We stared at it for a while, trying to make sense of it. Jack was the first to speak. "Think I can hit that cup off the roof." He had a rock in his hand. I don't know where he picked it up, but there it was, already ready to throw. We were standing maybe 90 feet away. That's a hell of a shot, but with Jack's arm, maybe. Still, me and John told him to knock it off. This wasn't the time or place for screwing around. We headed to my car, leaving him behind, still laughing and weighing the rock in his hand. We got in, I unlocked the doors, and as I started the engine, Jack came sprinting over, breathing fast. He didn't look like he was joking anymore. We need to go. Now." He slid into the back seat and slammed the door. That's when we heard the yelling. Someone was screaming from near the theater entrance. Angry, deep voices shouting, "Yo, what the fuck? And who did this?" It hit us like a slap in the face. Whoever owned that car had just come out of the theater. And it didn't look like they were alone. We didn't do anything to that car, but who was going to believe that? Especially in that part of town. Especially at night. Especially when we were the only people nearby, and Jack had just whipped a rock at it. The theater lot was not the kind of place where people asked questions. It was the kind of place where people acted first, fast, and aggressive. I didn't wait to think about it. I put the car in reverse and backed out fast. Jack was still laughing, that nervous, out-of-control laugh. "That guy can't catch us," he said. "His car's trashed." He was wrong. We made it maybe 5 minutes down the road, weaving through dimly lit streets, trying to act casual, but with tension pulling every one of us tight. That's when I saw the headlights. High beams, bright and blinding, flaring up in my rearview mirror. Someone was tailing us. Fast. I took a turn down a side street next to a gas station, hoping to shake them. But the car behind us didn't follow. It cut through the gas station itself and came out in front of me, blocking the road. Then another car pulled in behind us and stopped. That was the moment I felt real fear. Not movie fear or roller coaster fear, but genuine, I might die right here fear. The kind of fear that makes your hands go numb and your breathing turn shallow. The car in front of us put itself in park. I saw silhouettes moving. The car behind us had its doors open. I could make out shapes stepping out into the street. My mind blanked. I thought this was it. We were boxed in, no way out, and they were going to shoot up the car. I remember seeing a glint of silver in someone's hand near the front car's door. It could have been anything, but my brain filled in the blanks with the worst possible outcome. A knife, a gun, a pipe. I wasn't sticking around to find out. My heart was pounding in my ears. My body moved without my brain. I jammed my foot on the gas and turned the wheel hard. Somehow, I managed to squeak past the front car by inches, cutting through the gas station again and blowing through a red light on the other side. I didn't look back. I just drove. Jack was in the back, on his phone, calling anyone he thought might be at a house party nearby. He wanted us to pull up somewhere with a crowd. Safety in numbers. John sat next to me, stone-faced, calm as ever. He silently removed his chain necklace and stuffed it in the glove box along with his wallet, phone, and keys. He looked over and said something I barely registered. Something about pulling over and fighting. I thought he was insane. These guys didn't look like they wanted a fair fight. They wanted blood. I kept driving, speeding through yellow lights, taking turns faster than I ever had. We caught a lucky break, got through a green light just in time. The two cars behind us weren't so lucky. They got stuck behind traffic at a red. I didn't hesitate. I turned onto a larger road and gunned it, hitting close to 100 miles per hour. Jack was leaning between the front seats, watching the rear window. "They're gone," he said after a minute. I slowed down too fast, too soon. That was my mistake. The road ahead stretched straight for a mile with no exits. Nowhere to turn, nowhere to hide. I let up on the gas, and that's when Jack shouted again. Headlights. Two cars, gaining on us fast. I don't know what possessed me, but I did the dumbest thing I could think of. I pretended like nothing was happening. I held the speed limit, both hands on the wheel, acted like we were just three guys out for a late drive. One of the cars past us slowed down as it got a look at us, realized it was us, and began pacing alongside. Right before the exit, I swerved hard and took the ramp. The car beside us didn't react in time and missed it. I ditched him, but the second car followed. Now we were in familiar territory. My home ground. I knew the back roads. I turned and twisted through them like they were burned into my brain. No lights, no traffic, just winding dark paths and patches of fog rolling across the pavement. I pushed the car hard. The car behind us struggled to keep up. I started seeing them less and less in the rear view. We saw only 2 or 3 silhouettes in the car, which made us think maybe we had a shot if it came to that. Jack wanted to pull over now. Just one car. We could fight that. But what if they had weapons? We had nothing. A windshield scraper, a half-used bottle of Powerade, a box of Milk Duds that melted in the cup holder. That was it. Still, something shifted in me. I was done running. I picked a spot, a clearing near an empty field off a gravel road, and pulled over. We stopped. The car behind us slowed and rolled to a stop about 100 feet away. No lights, just sitting there. John was out of the car first. No hesitation. Then Jack. I climbed out last, heart hammering, legs stiff. We stood side by side, slowly walking toward the car. That's when Jack did something bizarre. He started waving his arms. Not at the car, but at the field. He gestured like he was signaling a dozen people to move in. He called out nonsense instructions. Waved them to the left, then to the right. There was no one there. Just corn and darkness. But from the distance, maybe they couldn't tell. We kept walking, confident, slow. The car inched backward. Then it picked up speed and drove off into the night. No screeching tires. No yelling. Just gone. We stood in the middle of that gravel road for a long time, not saying anything. Jack's dumb bluff had worked. The thought of an ambush was enough to scare them off. Maybe they were just trying to intimidate us the whole time. Maybe they didn't really want to fight either. We got back in the car. I drove us home. Nobody said much. We dropped. I grew up in a small town tucked into the rolling farmland of Ohio Amish country. There's not a whole lot out here unless you count cornfields, silos, and the occasional barn that's been standing for 100 years. It's the kind of place where the roads roll like waves and people still leave their doors unlocked during the day. I don't think I ever realized how quiet it was until I left for college. But back then, in high school, all that silence made us restless. Boredom was a constant, especially once the sun went down and there was nowhere left to drive unless you wanted to loop the same 10 roads over and over again. My friends and I always looked for something, anything, to give us a jolt. That meant we spent a lot of nights trying to scare ourselves. Sometimes it was trips to old cemeteries or supposed haunted barns. Other times it was messing around in the woods behind someone's property, lighting bonfires in pits dug by hand, passing around cheap liquor and half-cooked stories. That night was no different. It started the way most of our bad ideas started. Too much time, too little to do, and a movie that probably shouldn't have been watched with the lights off. We had just finished watching the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre at my buddy Kyle's place. The kind of movie that sticks with you, not because of the gore, but because of the tension, the way everything just feels wrong the moment the group steps off the road. So, naturally, we figured the best way to come down from it was to go out into the woods. Someone, I think it was Jeremy, mentioned an old abandoned house his cousin had told him about. Supposedly way out there, no road leading to it anymore. A place that used to be some kind of mansion at the turn of the century, but had long since rotted into the earth. It sounded perfect. There were 10 of us that night. Most of us were regulars. Me, Kyle, Jeremy, Brent, Alex, a couple girls from school, and a few others whose names blur together now. I remember grabbing my shotgun before we left. It wasn't loaded. Not at first. Just something I brought sometimes to feel like we had some kind of safety net if things went sideways. We weren't planning to use it, but I tossed in a couple shells anyway, just in case. We packed into a few cars and followed the gravel road for about 15 minutes past the last house. The road ended at a dead patch of brush, where we parked the cars and got out. From there, we had to cross a shallow river. Nothing too deep, just enough to soak our socks if we missed a rock, and walk for about a mile into the woods. The air was cool and still, the only sound being the distant hum of crickets and the crunch of boots on dead leaves. Everyone had flashlights, and I walked in the middle of the group with my shotgun slung over my shoulder, the cold metal tucked tight to my back. The woods got darker the deeper we went. You'd be surprised how fast the night swallows the trees out here, how fast the moon disappears behind the tangled canopy. After 20 minutes or so, the trees started thinning and we came to a clearing. That's when we saw it. The house rose out of the ground like a broken tooth, jagged and gray, missing most of its roof. It was massive, bigger than I expected. A real mansion, probably once a stunner in its time. But time hadn't been kind. The paint had long since peeled off, revealing weathered wooden planks. The windows were black hollows, their frames splintered and warped. There wasn't a driveway, just grass and dirt choking the front steps. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. We circled the place slowly, everyone shining their lights in different directions. There was no going inside. What used to be the second floor had caved in and collapsed onto the first. You could see the wreckage through the empty windows, wood beams snapped like toothpicks, ceiling plaster scattered in chunks, rusted furniture buried beneath. I remember the smell the most. Damp rot, old insulation, maybe even animal nests. Something sharp and earthy, like mildew and rust had taken root and never left. As we wandered around the back of the house, Jeremy stopped in front of one of the exterior walls. He called us over, pointing his flashlight at a section of the siding. There was writing, faded but still legible, covering about a 6-foot stretch of wall. It looked like names, phrases, almost like someone had taken a marker or paint and scrawled every dark thought they'd ever had across the wood. There were slurs, strange symbols, phrases like "still hear them at night," and "bones don't burn" etched alongside things that didn't make any sense. But near the end of the wall, spaced neatly apart, were 10 sets of initials. One by one, we all took a closer look, and that's when it hit us. Every single one of those sets of initials matched someone in our group. Not just close, but exact. Same order, same letters. I felt the air go still. It wasn't a joke. None of us had been here before, and we sure as hell didn't carve them ourselves. The girls got freaked out first, backing away from the wall. Everyone else stood there staring at it like it might change if we looked at it long enough. I felt something tighten in my chest, something cold. I had been trying to shake the images from the movie we'd watched, but now it felt like I had stepped inside it. We started to pull back, deciding we'd seen enough. The mood had shifted. It wasn't fun anymore. It wasn't a joke or a dare. It felt like something we shouldn't have found. As we turned to leave, Brent's flashlight flashed across the far side of the house, and he stopped dead in his tracks. He motioned us over, not saying anything, just frozen in place, light trained on one of the first floor windows that hadn't completely collapsed. We walked up beside him, and I saw what he was looking at. Inside the room was a white wedding dress, tied to a rope that hung from what was left of a ceiling beam. It swayed slightly as if it had just been moved. The front of the dress was stained with a dark, brown-red smear, old blood, or something that looked like it. It wasn't the way the dress hung that scared me. It was how deliberate it all felt. Like someone had put it there to be seen. Like someone was waiting for us to look in that window. I felt my mouth go dry. I took a step back, and as I did, the ground beneath me gave way. A loud crack split the air, then a low rumble, and suddenly I was falling. 6 of us dropped through the rotted wood, the earth swallowing us into darkness. We landed in a heap about 10 feet down. Dust filled my lungs. My leg twisted under someone else's weight, and I could hear groans and coughing all around me. I scrambled to get my flashlight, which had bounced out of my hand during the fall. When I found it and clicked it on, I froze. We weren't in a basement. Not really. It was more like a dugout crawl space beneath the house. Dirt walls, uneven floor, no concrete or structure. Just soil and old wood bracing the sagging house above. But what was inside that space still haunts me. There were tables against the walls, covered in old tools, rusted saws, shears, clamps, meat hooks. Chains hung from beams above us, tangled in loops, some with bits of rope still tied to them. There were bones, small ones, big ones, scattered on one of the tables. Everything was arranged too neatly, like someone had taken their time, like it wasn't random. It didn't feel like a place someone lived in. It felt like a place someone used. I didn't stop to study it. None of us did. Above us, the others were yelling, scrambling to find something to pull us out with. Jeremy dropped down a branch, and one by one we were dragged back up into the night. Everyone made it out except for Kyle, who had landed awkwardly on his ankle. He couldn't put weight on it. 2 guys supported him between them, dragging him along with every step as we started the walk back through the woods. The whole group was quiet. No one wanted to say out loud what we'd seen. We moved in a tight clump, flashlights constantly scanning the trees around us. I kept my shotgun at the ready, walking at the rear of the group, watching behind us with each step. My finger was tight on the trigger. Safety off. I didn't care how stupid it might have looked. I was ready to put a hole in anything that so much as cracked a twig too close to us. We made it back to the cars without incident, but I don't think any of us spoke a word the entire ride home. It wasn't until the next afternoon that a few of us decided to go back and see the place again in daylight. We were stupid, I guess. Curious. We wanted to convince ourselves it wasn't as bad as it had seemed. Maybe the wedding dress was a prank. Maybe the initials were a weird coincidence. When we got to the gravel road, there were 3 cop cars parked along the edge, lights off, hoods cold. We pulled up beside them and rolled down our window. One of the officers walked over, said someone had heard yelling in the woods the night before and called it in. When the cops had gone out to investigate, they found the house. The officer didn't give a lot of detail, but he said enough. The place had been used as a meth lab at some point. But worse than that, they found evidence of multiple violent crimes, blood evidence, restraints, tools. They weren't sure how old everything was, or who might have been there recently, but they were treating it as an active crime scene. We didn't ask more. We didn't tell them what we saw. We just nodded and turned the car around. That was the last time I saw that place. A few months later, I heard they burned the house down. Said it was a hazard. Maybe that was true, or maybe someone just didn't want people going back out there. Even now, years later, I think about that night, about how close we came to something we didn't understand. If the people who had used that house were there that night,